Chapter 538. Ah, the sky is so blue, so blue. On the vast expanse of grassland, Wang Lu sat in a large carriage, looked up at the sky, and sighed sincerely at the blue sky. Little brother, is there something bothering you? The old man driving the car asked loudly against the howling wind. Hearing this, Wang Lu couldn't help but be surprised. Huh? Why do you ask? Big brother, you can see it? The driver chuckled. You've sighed more than 20 times today that the sky is so blue. Yes, the sky is really blue. Wang Lu sighed again and then lay down on the carriage, no longer looking at the sky. However, a moment later, he felt impatient. Annoyance came one after another, making him unable to bear it. So, Wang Lu simply moved to the front of the carriage, moved behind the driver, and asked with interest, Big brother, you've been driving in the southern heaven region for so many years, so you must be very knowledgeable. I want to ask you a question. Little brother, please ask. For a distinguished guest who had spent a lot of money to hire him as a driver, the old driver showed a very good sense of service. Wang Lu asked, say, if one day you get drunk and do a lot of stupid things, some good and some bad things, and when you wake up, you forget all those things. Before he finished, the driver laughed, Little brother, you've asked the right person. I've encountered this kind of thing too many times. Every time I leave Hangzhou to go somewhere else, after I come back, I will drink a few cups. Sometimes, when I make a lot of money, I will drink more, and when I wake up the next day at noon, I don't remember anything, haha. Wang Lu smiled and then said, if you do something particularly out of line and have a close relationship with the people around you, what should I do? The driver waved his hand, what else can I do? If I have to admit my mistakes, I have to admit my mistakes. Hey, you're right. Wang Lu shrugged. Little brother. The driver simply began to nag, I see that you're young, have an extraordinary way of talking, and are generous, so you're not from an ordinary family. For a big shot like you, even if you do something wrong, there's still room for redemption. There's really nothing to be afraid of. Look at me. Last year, when I was drunk, I broke a porcelain bottle. I had to pay for 3 years of my savings, but it still wasn't enough. If I hadn't met a kind-hearted person who helped me out, I would be eating food in prison now. However, sometimes, when the matter is too big, you have to be more cautious when facing it. If it really doesn't work, you have to go back on your word when it's time to do so. Wang Lu laughed. Well said. When it's time to go back on your word, go back on your word. The two of them laughed for a while, and Wang Lu gradually began to talk about sex. He asked, let's say you fall in love with someone, and that person is not bad in all aspects, and he's also quite interested in you. So, the two of you decide to marry each other, and you're affectionate, and you even get pregnant. The coachman nodded as he listened, seeming to agree. It seemed that his love life was going well. Then, if one day, you suddenly find out that that person is your long-lost sister, what would you do? As soon as Wang Lu's voice fell, he saw the coachman's whole body trembled, and then he exclaimed in surprise and fear, how did you know? Wang Lu quietly looked at the coachman, and in his heart, 10,000 alpacas galloped wildly. After a long time, Wang Lu faintly said, in short, I don't have any prejudice against this kind of thing. The most important thing for a person is to be happy. To have a beloved person to give you to eat is more important than anything else, right? The coachman's body stiffened, and then he reluctantly swallowed and nodded. So, what happened to you guys? The coachman was silent for a while, and then he sighed. What else can I do? I hid it from my family, gave birth to the child, and then moved out to live a slow life. After a long time, the child grew up, and the rest is still the same. Wang Lu nodded and muttered to himself, child. This is indeed a key factor. It had been some time since Wang Lu returned to 9 regions. On that day, after the longest dream ended, he found himself lying on the grassland of the southern heaven region. It turned out that when he returned to 9 regions from the demon world, he was entangled by the ghost of the fallen immortal demon king and pulled into the dream of the demon king. Later, when the dream was broken, Wang Lu was caught in the turbulence of time and space and thrown into an unknown corner of the southern heaven region. Fortunately, he was not thrown into some dangerous place. After returning to 9 regions, Wang Lu was not in a hurry to return to the sect. He even deliberately used a mortal technique to shield his existence. All the props that belonged to the Lingjian school were sealed in his mustard seed bag, including the sword of Mount Kun. After that dream, Wang Lu's hard work was not in vain. On the contrary, his harvest was so huge that he had to take a period of time to digest it carefully. During this period, he didn't want to rush to meet the people from the Lingjian school, because he hadn't figured out how to face them. The simplest way was like this: comrades, I, Ouyang II, am back. Come and kneel down, ha ha ha. The result was probably like this: what are you guys doing? Show some respect. It's you, surnamed Feng. I order you to stop immediately. And you, surnamed Lu, don't think that I don't know your dark history. I am. Ah. Then there would probably be one more corpse that died of mental illness on Spirit Sword Mountain. The friendship of the Golden Generation was unquestionable, but it had been more than 100 years. How to face a reincarnated Big Brother was probably a problem for Feng Yin and the others. Continue to let him be the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Mountain? It didn't seem appropriate. Abdicate and give him the position of sect leader? It seemed even more absurd. Moreover, the key to the problem was Wang Wu. Wang Lu didn't know how to face his respected master. After seeing that dark history, Wang Lu's heart could be said to have mixed feelings. There was admiration, there was sympathy, there was that kind of feeling, not to mention. The awakening of his previous life's consciousness only allowed Wang Lu to know some things, but he would not inherit Ouyang Shang's memory. Therefore, the farewell kiss, as well as the promise of eternal love, was really a burden. This matter was not only for him, but also for Wang Wu. For her, the memory of more than 100 years ago had probably faded. As for that promise, presumably, she would only hide it at the bottom of her heart. Because people always had to look forward. Those who could not forget the past had no qualification to move forward. At the same time, after so many years, Wang Wu's happy character had long been deeply ingrained and could not be restored. The reason was very simple. More than 100 years ago, when Ouyang Shang said his last words to her, how old was Wang Wu? How old was she now? Most of her life was spent in a happy heart. Her stubborn and introverted character had probably gone with the wind. So, for a happy Wang Wu, if she put on the posture of a former lover, what would the result be? Junior sister, I'm late, not late, not late. Let's consummate our marriage and then share the property, ha ha ha. To be honest, such a scene was not difficult to imagine. At the same time, it was not difficult to predict the development of the future. Scandal, big scandal. A shocking scandal broke out in Lingjian School, one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. The 5th elder of the Heavenly Sword Hall, Wang Wu, and the head disciple of the school, Wang Lu, disregarded ethics and shamelessly committed adultery. When questioned, she actually used the excuse of a former lover, which was the biggest joke in the world. Please see this issue of the news for details. 1 spirit stone for 1 copy. 1 spirit stone for 1 copy. The following is a report from our reporter. Hello everyone. I am Xiao Mei, a reporter from the 9 States News Center in the Blue River region. Regarding the recent uproar of the Lingjian School, I have interviewed the insiders of the Lingjian School. According to the 3rd elder of the Heavenly Sword Hall, who did not want to be named, Wang Wu has always been unruly in the school, which has a bad precedent, so it is not surprising that this scandal has caused. The school has long been dissatisfied with her. It is said that the Heavenly Sword Hall has held many sect leaders' office meetings, and many elders have jointly proposed to punish her, which has received the support of the school. 5th junior sister, now the public opinion is in an uproar. I think you also know that the matter between you and eldest senior brother. No, Wang Lu actually has a lot of support within the school, but after all, the pressure of public opinion is too great, so you see, sect leader, senior brother, other things are not a big deal, but the problem is that we already have a child. What? When you held the sect leader's office meeting that night, I discovered the crisis in time, so I worked with Wang Lu overnight, and finally, we reaped the harvest. You don't want the child in my belly to be born without a father, do you? Hey, this move of yours is too cheap. The most important thing to be a person is to be happy, get lost. These were the thoughts of Wang Lu. At the thought of that kind of life, Wang Lu was disheartened and had no interest in returning to the mountain. Alas, if I knew it would be like this, I wouldn't have gone to the demon world in the first place. It's so troublesome. Wang Lu was lying on his back in the carriage, bored to death. Of course, objectively speaking, although his trip to the demon world and the dream of time travel had brought him countless problems, it was also a big profit. His current entanglement was somewhat of a pretentious act. Not to mention the undigested inheritance of the fallen immortal that was still in his jade mansion, the things left behind by Ouyang Shang in his previous life were quite rich. The simplest one was that after learning about his own life experience, many questions that had puzzled him for a long time were answered. For example, where did the wonderful ideas that lingered in his mind since he was born come from? Including the concept of professional adventurers, bourgeoisie, proletariat. Since his birth, these things had constantly flashed through his mind, and occasionally, he would dream of many wonderful scenes. Hundreds of feet high metal and glass buildings, huge metal machines and puppets. It was a wonder that no corner of 9 regions had ever seen, but it lingered in his mind. At that time, by chance, he heard that there were people in the world who were born with knowledge, and their situation was quite similar to his own. And all of those people had earth-shattering achievements. Coupled with the void spirit root, which made him see and hear different things since he was a child, he had a firm ambition to cultivate immortality. Now that he thought about it, wasn't he a time traveler? Of course, this time traveler was more complicated than his peers. At the same time, it was no wonder that he subconsciously chose Lingjian School, although being close to home was the most important factor. With his self-confidence at that time, the #1 sect in the world, Xingjing sect, was actually a better choice. These problems seemed insignificant, but for a cultivator, they were an important part of self-awareness. In the future, when he reached Yuanying stage and deity stage, if these problems were not solved, he would inevitably encounter obstacles and even inner demons. Now that all the problems were clear, some of the obstacles on the road of immortal cultivation had been swept away. Secondly, the awakening of the consciousness of his previous life made Wang Lu feel as if a bright light had been lit in his heart. Simply put, there were some clear purposes in life. Before that, his life and immortal cultivation were somewhat muddle-headed. After joining the Spirit Sword sect, although he had done a lot of things, most of them were because of the situation. Simply put, when the problem came, he would go and solve it. When the problem didn't come, he would just honestly cultivate on the mountain. His initiative was not strong. But now, it was different. Fallen immortal. What a big problem. Chapter 539. The second reason to prevent Wang Lu from returning to the sect as soon as possible was the inheritance of the fallen immortal. The crystal ball of light had not been completely absorbed, but Wang Lu had extracted a considerable part of the knowledge from it. The inheritance of the fallen immortal was not as rich as initially expected. The fallen immortal was deceived by Ouyang Shang's trick. After exploding his body, the remaining trace of primordial spirit was restrained by the Great Heart Demon Oath and could not be reincarnated. When he met with Wang Lu, there was actually only a layer of dregs left. Were it not for this, in his dreamland, Wang Lu would not have won the decisive battle so easily. Thus, after many tricks, the fruit of victory would naturally be greatly reduced. After more than 100 years of weathering, most of the memory of the fallen immortal had been lost or incomplete, leaving only a small part. Among them, the most valuable was some experience about the dream-building technique. Wang Lu intended to spend some time to study it carefully and strive to master this unique skill of the demon world. There were also 2 or 3 incomplete immortal level methods. However, for people who came from the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, the incomplete immortal level method was of little significance. It only had a certain academic research value. After all, even the complete immortal level method stellar sword was not very attractive to Wang Lu now. Apart from that, the most important thing in the inheritance of the fallen immortal was his memory about the fallen immortal world, tentatively named the world occupied by the fallen immortals. Because most of the memory had been weathered and incomplete, Wang Lu looked vague. He only saw a sea of purgatory fire and countless creatures suffering in pain. It was a scene of hell. On that day, in the dream of the fallen immortal, the crack in the sky was briefly opened, and a large number of cannon fodder creatures poured out. Those cannon fodder were grotesque, murderous and resentful. It was a characteristic that could only be cultivated in absolute torture. The situation in the fallen immortal world could also be seen. If this group of fallen immortals were allowed to rush out of the passage and occupy 9 regions, it would be a disaster. Perhaps it would be worse than the defeat in the Great War of Immortals and Demons. Therefore, at that time, the previous generation of Elders of Spirit Sword Sect did not hesitate to seal the crack in the sky, which was really a great merit. No matter how insidious the politics in the Wanxian League were, they had nothing to say. But things didn't end there. The fallen immortal world had never stopped spying on 9 regions. The previous fallen immortal who sneaked into the demon world, who seemed to be called Mr. Fengyu, was just a vanguard, and the main force was still waiting behind. After the death of Mr. Fengyu, the fallen immortal world would not let it go. They would send new people, and they would only be stronger than Mr. Fengyu. Was 9 regions ready to face the next fallen immortal? At least from the current peaceful scene, there was no such thing at all. Let alone the fallen immortal world, even the matter of the devil race had almost been forgotten. Now, except for the immortal race and the devil race, who else could really be familiar with the matters of the devil race? In addition to devoting themselves to cultivation, cultivators wasted their energy on internal strife. If it weren't for the recent emergence of Fengdu in the southern heaven region, which diverted a considerable part of the social contradictions, it was feared that a local war would break out in the Wanxian League to alleviate the contradictions. Of course, things did not need to be too pessimistic. According to the memory of Mr. Fengyu, the passage between the 2 worlds was very difficult to break through. Mr. Fengyu himself spent 2,000 years but failed on the verge of success, so it was not so easy for future generations to inherit his career. At least for the first step, how to send the vanguard into 9 regions again was a big problem. The first vanguard of the fallen immortal world, Mr. Fengyu, could only enter 9 regions through a detour in the demon world. Now that the demon world was basically destroyed, it was not so easy to use the old way to send people over. However, it was just not easy, things were far from being worry-free. From the memory of Mr. Fengyu, Wang Lu learned that after Mr. Fengyu was suppressed by Fenrir, the fallen immortal world had begun to explore a variety of new ways to invade, and several of them had made great progress. Time waited for no man, however, when he wanted to further analyze the content, he found that part of the content was actually encrypted. This Mr. Fengyu, who had been air-dried for 100 years, still had such a strong sense of confidentiality, which caused a lot of trouble for the later generations. Thinking of this, Wang Lu turned over in the carriage with some irritation and said, "Why is the sky so blue?" One day later, the carriage arrived at its destination, Mang Mountain City. This grassland city was backed by Mount Mang and could be regarded as a remote border city. The population of the city was only a few thousand, and even the city wall was sloppy. Fortunately, the people were simple, so it was also a comfortable place. The coachman sent Wang Lu to the city, enthusiastically introduced the local customs of Mang Mountain City, and tried to recommend an inn to him. Along the way, he could see that Wang Lu was from an extraordinary background, so he planned to choose the most expensive inn in the city and get a lot of commission for himself. Unexpectedly, he only talked until his mouth was dry, but there was no sound behind the carriage. The coachman was so angry that when he looked back, he saw that the carriage had long been empty, leaving only a few silver ingots and a few shiny stones. The coachman was at a loss for a moment, and then he was shocked inwardly. He had been driving for many years, so the carriage was like a part of his body. A young man who weighed more than 100 pounds was gone, but he didn't notice any movement at all when he was driving in front of the carriage. But he was experienced and knowledgeable, so he knew that rather than saying he saw a ghost, it was more like meeting an immortal. Thinking of this, the more the coachman thought about it, the more reasonable he felt. If it wasn't an immortal, how could he walk in the daytime and come and go without a trace? Moreover, he didn't seek money or kill anyone along the way, so if it wasn't an immortal, who could it be? He was really lucky this time. That was an immortal. In this small country where he lived, there hadn't been an immortal for many years. Today, he actually met one, although that person's words and actions were all unique, and indeed quite different from ordinary immortals. It was a pity that he didn't talk much with immortals along the way, so he didn't get to absorb more immortal aura. But there were treasures left by immortals in the carriage. The coachman had no intention of using or selling the silver ingots and stones. He wanted to go home and offer them to his house to ward off evil spirits, and then pass them down from generation to generation. With the immortal's blessing, his descendants would presumably be free of worries. Let's not talk about how the coachman imagined the future in his heart. Let's talk about how Wang Lu quietly left the city after entering Mang Mountain City and went directly to Mount Mang. Because he smelled the aura of a cultivator in the city. The strength of the other party was not strong, probably between Shudan Stage and King Pill Stage. However, in this small border city, this kind of cultivation base was enough to become the guardian of the city from generation to generation, which was the standard local bully. The key was that the person's aura was unstable. It seemed that he was injured, and such a cultivator was most sensitive, especially to foreign cultivators. Wang Lu didn't intend to meet this kind of person face to face. He didn't want to waste time arguing with an insignificant native. Moreover, if things got out of hand. This was the Southern Heaven region, where Plentiful City was located. Even though the population of Lingjian School was not large, there were still a lot of people stationed here. However, Wang Lu didn't intend to greet the people of Lingjian School. Now, he wandered aimlessly in the Southern Heaven region in order to sort out his thoughts and organize his cultivation base. In the battle with the fallen immortal Feng Yu in the dream, his harvest was comprehensive. The comprehensive improvement of his cultivation base brought by the 3 years of living in gutter oil was real. Now, Wang Lu's cultivation base was at the peak of King Pill Stage, but this kind of peak King Pill Stage that was soaked in gutter oil naturally needed to be squeezed out of the water. Then Wang Lu chose Mount Mang. This mountain, which was more than 1,000 feet high, was regarded as a barren mountain in the map of the immortal cultivation world. Because, although in theory, there were often immortal spirits in the mountains, at least it was easy to become a node of Feng Shui line. After all, the mountain itself was the product of the violent movement of the Earth's crust. However, Mount Mang was a special case. Not to mention the node of Feng Shui line, even the Feng Shui line avoided it. The surrounding spiritual energy was pitifully thin. Therefore, Mount Mang was also called the Blind Mountain by many cultivators in the Southern Heaven region. However, this kind of place was the best for the current Wang Lu. His king pill had been formed, so his true qi and magical power could grow and multiply endlessly. Moreover, his cultivation base was too high, so he didn't need to use the outside spiritual energy to enhance his cultivation base. In fact, with his void spirit root qualification, it was best to find a place isolated from spiritual energy, so as not to accidentally absorb a large amount of spiritual energy into his body. For Taoist Master King Pill, the mountain was only a step away, but Wang Lu didn't want to expose his identity near empty Mang, so he walked on foot and spent half a day to reach the peak. Mount Mang was indeed worthy of being called a blind mountain with thin spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Not to mention cultivators, even ordinary creatures were rare. The peak of the mountain was barren with rocks, and there were pitifully few birds, beasts, and even insects. Wang Lu didn't pay attention to it. He directly found a flat stone and sat cross-legged. Then, his primordial spirit sank down from his purple mansion and combined with the king pill, which was so full that it looked like it was about to burst. He urged it to rotate crazily, constantly throwing out the impurities inside the king pill. The power from the black tide was soon squeezed out by Wang Lu's non-phase Chaos King Pill. Although the size of the King Pill was reduced, it made the structure of the King Pill more plump and pure. This process lasted for a full 3 days. After 3 days, the King Pill in his jade mansion had shrunk by 1/10, and Wang Lu's overall cultivation level had fallen from the peak of King Pill to the high level of King Pill. However, although his cultivation level had fallen, Wang Lu felt that his strength had not fallen, but instead, it had risen, because the King Pill had shrunk, which made it more convenient to use. Moreover, in the process of shrinking his Dan, Wang Lu also began to try to integrate the non-phase method and primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi in the King Pill. Of these two immortal level methods, one focused on attack and the other focused on defense. Although they could be said to have both offense and defense when used together, after all, there was still a bit of sluggishness in the conversion of these two methods. When he crushed the small fish, he didn't feel it, but when he faced the same level or even higher level powerhouses, it would be a big problem. Previously, in the final decisive battle in the dream, he designed the 3 individual sword array and occupied the sky position. However, in the actual combat, he could only use the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi to attack. There was no room for his non-phase method. This was because at present, he had no way to freely switch between the two immortal level methods. According to the previous plan, the integration of the two methods should be done after he reached Yuanying stage. However, after obtaining the inheritance of Mr. Fengyu, Wang Lu felt that there was some inspiration in his mind, and it seemed that he could implement this step ahead of time. Although the difficulty was not small and it would take a long time. However, in any case, he had not come up with a plan on how to face the elders of Spirit Sword Sect. Thus, Wang Lu planned to concentrate on cultivation first and put other things aside. Unfortunately, 2 days later, the plan was ruthlessly aborted. Chapter 540. As far as the patience of an elite King Pill cultivator was concerned, it was common for a closed-door training to last for 3 to 5 years. Wang Lu didn't intend to do it for that long, but he also wanted to live in seclusion in Mount Mang for a few months. At first, he went to explore the demon realm with Qianghua and the others. Later, Qianghua and the others returned smoothly, but he was separated on the way back. After that, 5 months had passed in 9 regions. During this period, the news of his separation must have spread throughout the Wanxian League through the mouths of Qianghua and the others. Now, those who should be anxious must have already been anxious. After the initial excitement, they must prepare for the aftermath. Now, his inheritance might have fallen into someone's hands. Therefore, it was useless to be anxious. It was better to spend a few months to calm down. Unfortunately, Wang Lu only lived in seclusion in the mountain for a total of 5 days before the peace was broken by a sudden change. On this day, Wang Lu was closing his eyes and concentrating on shrinking his dantian. He began to formally study the integration of non-phase and chaos. As a result, just as his mind entered a mysterious state, he heard a harsh laughter coming from the foot of the mountain. Ha ha ha, 10,000 spirits blood pearl, 10,000 spirits blood pearl is finally born, ha ha ha. Wang Lu suddenly woke up from his meditation. This laughter could resound through the mountains, which was naturally the work of a cultivator. He didn't want to deal with cultivators, but what the cultivator said while laughing made him care. 10,000 spirits blood pearl was born? The term million spirits blood pearl had been widely used in the cultivation world for a long time. The earliest million spirits blood pearl was born in the untainted land. It was condensed by powerful figures at the ancestral sorcerer level by refining the blood of tens of thousands of spiritual creatures. Later, people continued to imitate it according to the legends, and the finished products were all kinds of strange. They were all called 10,000 spirits blood pearl, but their effects were very different. The more effective ones were close to the power of immortal treasures, while the less effective ones were just touching the edge of magic treasures. However, no matter what the grade was, this 10,000 spirits blood pearl was mostly an evil thing. Something that needed to be refined with the blood of living beings was not necessarily an evil thing. However, In today's immortal cultivation environment, it was simply a joke to expect cultivators to collect the blood of living beings in a peaceful way. Nowadays, the million spirits' blood pearls circulating in the cultivation world were basically not decent. But now, this laughter was filled with unbridled murderous intent. A bloody smell soared into the sky, reaching the top of the mountain. Wang Lu could naturally guess what had happened down there. TSK, at that time, he was distracted and inadvertently made a mistake. The Shudan stage cultivator in Timang City was not a guardian at all, but a fierce evil cultivator. The reason why he came to Laoshan City was to refine the million spirits' blood pearl with the lives of thousands of mortals in the city. Damn it, I can't even find a secluded place to cultivate. Why is the sky so blue? With Wang Lu's current mood, he didn't really care about the tragedy at the foot of Pyrolite Mountain. The so-called principle of immortals and mortals walking different paths had long been imprinted on him, the enlightened King Pill. 9 regions was so big, and there were hundreds of millions of mortals. Killing and torture happened all the time. Even if he had great ability, it was impossible for him to take care of them all. Moreover, the things that happened here would be dealt with by the Wanxian League. As an outsider, there was no need for him to intervene. However, the evil cultivator in Timang City had made such a big move this time, especially when he openly revealed the name of the million spirits' blood pearl, as if he was afraid that others wouldn't know that he was courting death. So, it wouldn't be long before the commissioner of the local sect came. They might not be able to stop the evil cultivator who refined the blood pearl in time, but when they came, Wang Lu wouldn't be able to stay on the top of Pyrolite Mountain anymore. Even more pessimistically, the traces he left on the top of the mountain might be discovered, and then his whereabouts would be exposed. In less than 3 days, he would be dragged back to the mountain by an old woman who lacked moral integrity for more than 100 years to bow to the heaven and earth and get married. They would have sex every day and night, so that they could give birth to a noble son early, and the mother would become noble because of her son. Thinking of this, Wang Lu's whole body trembled, and he quickly began to clean up the traces. However, for cultivators who were good at divination and above, it was difficult to clean up the traces, so he just did his best. At the same time, he directly used his primordial spirit to sweep down, intending to leave a mark on the evil cultivator. That guy had ruined his plan, so he wouldn't let it go so easily. If he didn't beat the sh*t out of him, he wouldn't be able to think clearly. As a result, when his primordial spirit swept down, he saw something unexpected. Timang City had now been massacred by the evil cultivator. Broken tiles and ruins were everywhere, and the fire was soaring to the sky. At the door of an inn next to the former main road of Timang City, a man who was about 40 or 50 years old fell to the ground with his head tilted. There was a huge hole in his chest, and the blood had already coagulated. His heart in his chest was cruelly pulled out and thrown aside. The man's hands fell to the ground, and a few silver ingots reflected the fire in his palms, looking gloomy. How come it's you? That man was the coachman who sent him to Timang City 5 days ago. Unexpectedly, he stayed in a remote place like Timang City for 5 days and got into a big trouble. Wang Lu sighed secretly. He and this coachman were fated. The conversation in the carriage couldn't be said to be enlightening, but it slightly relieved his worries. Therefore, that day, he gave the coachman silver ingots and spirit stones to end this fate. In the end, it seemed that the coachman suddenly got a huge sum of money and began to forget himself. He went out alone and made a fortune, so it was normal for him to want to do something in this small city. However, the result was, thinking of this, Wang Lu was not in a hurry to clean up the traces. He jumped down from the top of the mountain. His escape technique was mediocre, and the blessings of Mother Earth, Ouyang Shang in his previous life, were not brought to this life. However, he was the first disciple of the 5 uniques, and his attainments in immortal spells were not bad. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the dead coachman in Timang City. Wang Lu lit a fire in his hand and was ready to reincarnate for the coachman. However, when he saw the silver ingots in the coachman's hand, he suddenly thought of something. Where did the spirit stones that were given to him that day go? Although the spirit stones were not rare treasures, they were also valuable in the mortal world. Could it be that he could not wait to get rid of the spirit stones? No, those ingots of silver were not small change. If he wanted to live freely in the city, 1 ingot was more than enough. The coachman was also a man with a family and a career, so he would not do things recklessly like young people. Thinking of this, Wang Lu simply used the soul summoning skill to collect some of the remnants of the coachman's soul. The main soul had been refined into the million spirits blood pearl. Although the remnant soul was incomplete, it happened to remember some images of the last few days before his death. Wang Lu restored it with magic. Tian Lao San, how come I see you again today? This Black Pine House is a first-class restaurant in Empty Mang City, but you come here every day these days. Are you trying to murder me for money? In the restaurant, a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes greeted him with a slight smile. Tian Lao San laughed and scolded, "Bah! You're the one trying to murder me for money. I'm so lucky that I met a benefactor." You, Tian Lao San, can also meet a benefactor? Humph, believe it or not, you will be envious in a few days. Waiter, bring the dishes from yesterday to the table again. In the pink house, they were leaning against each other, beautiful and charming. Master Tian, I heard from my sisters that you've made a fortune recently. Tian Lao San, who was already drunk, laughed and said, "Humph, a fortune. I don't care about making a fortune anymore. I've been having a good time in the city these days, spending all my private money. Because this time, I'm so lucky and met an immortal fate." The girls looked at him curiously. Immortal fate? Tian Lao San couldn't keep it a secret, and he knew that the girls in the drunken immortal house loved these strange stories. He took out the silver ingots and spirit stones to show off. "I met an immortal, ha ha ha." However, the next moment, the door opened, and a gust of chilly wind blew in. Riding the chilly wind, a young man broke into the room. He was wearing a black robe with hundreds of red dots printed on it. He stared at the spirit stones in Tian Lao San's hand and asked coldly, "An immortal?" Tian Lao San was stunned and then became furious. "You, who are you? Who let you in? Get out." The young man said coldly, "I'll ask you again. You said you met an immortal. Is it an immortal like me?" The next moment, the black robe moved, and a red dot flew out and turned into a bloody skeleton in the air. It bit off half of a girl's body. Blood and intestines flowed all over the ground. Tian Lao San was scared out of his wits. "Ah, please spare me, please spare me." The young man ignored him and grabbed the spirit stones. He played with them in his hand and frowned. Then, his eyes became ferocious. "It's really the spirit stones of the Wanxian League. You've chased me all the way here and won't stop. Fine, since you're so aggressive, don't blame me for being desperate. Million spirits blood pearl, rise." Then, the image could no longer be read. Wang Lu dispersed the remnant soul and sighed. This Tian Lao San was really unlucky to encounter this kind of misfortune. The young man in the black robe was most likely a cultivator who was being chased and ran to Empty Mang City to hide and wait for an opportunity to heal. Empty Mang was a place where the Reiki of heaven and earth was exhausted, and almost no cultivators came here. It was even more difficult for the pursuers to expect an injured person to hide in a place lacking Reiki, so he chose a good place. However, after Tian Lao San entered the city with his adventure, because he couldn't control his mouth, the news of the immortal fate gradually spread, which shocked the evil cultivator who fled here. No cultivators had come to Empty Mang City for many years. Not long after he was chased here, another person came. It was hard to believe that this was a coincidence. However, mortals were so ignorant that they might not have really met a cultivator. Maybe they were just dreaming after drinking too much. So, he secretly watched Tian Lao San. In his drunken stupor, he took out a few high-quality round spirit stones. Then, in desperation, Empty Mang City was destroyed. Wang Lu shook his head. Tian Lao San died unjustly, and so did all the people in the city. The evil cultivator didn't want to do that at first, but he was stimulated. And the source of the stimulation was none other than, of course, Wang Lu was not a saint. Although this disaster was caused by him, he had no responsibility at all. But if he just left like this, well, I'll waste a little time to get rid of the evil for the people. At this point, Wang Lu no longer concealed his aura. A sharp sword chi soared into the sky, directly breaking the bloody sky that covered the whole city. Who is it? The blood curtain of the million spirits' blood pearl was broken, and the evil cultivator trembled violently, horrified. Wang Lu replied coldly, an immortal. Chapter 541. In the sky above Emtimang City, the black-robed cultivator looked at the sword cultivator who suddenly appeared in front of him in confusion. He originally thought that the cultivator who quietly entered Emtimang City was a cultivator of the Wuxia League who secretly chased him. Unexpectedly, the one who was stimulated by the 10,000 spirits blood bead was a stranger. Moreover, the devil chi on his body was soaring to the sky, which meant that he was most likely an evil cultivator. There was nothing more unfortunate than this in the world. He was ready to do something desperate and did not hesitate to slaughter the entire city. Nearly 10,000 people in Emtimang City were killed by the evil method, and for a time, the resentment soared to the sky. This kind of thing could not be hidden from others. It was estimated that in less than 3 days, in addition to the several young cultivators of the Wuxia League who chased him, even the elders would jump out to kill the evil. The genius disciple of the blood-refining sect, Zheng Liming, most likely would not be able to wait for the day when he would be able to move unhindered in the 9 regions. As the saying goes, a cornered dog would do something desperate. This was an act of drinking poison to quench thirst. However, unexpectedly, after drinking the poison, he found that his mouth was even drier. You. Who the hell are you? Zheng Liming was dismayed. He just wanted to know who this fellow cultivator who made him destroy his own future was. Immortal. Immortal? Zheng Liming was stunned for a long time, and then he felt even more unlucky. He didn't expect that the person who made him break out in a cold sweat was actually a madman. The path of immortal cultivation was full of thorns. There were countless people who were entangled by the devil in their heart and became delirious, thinking that they had become immortals. This kind of person's behavior was disordered and there was no rule to speak of. Zheng Liming was irritated for a while, and his killing intent gradually rose. The evil cultivators had no scruples in doing things, so the so-called friendship of fellow cultivators was, of course, just a joke. Although the realm of this madman seemed to be quite good, middle-level King Pill. However, he came from a famous sect, had a deep foundation, and had the newly refined 10,000 spirits blood bead. Even if he was a middle-level King Pill, he might not necessarily lose. In addition, the strength of this kind of cultivator entangled by the devil in his heart would probably be reduced, so there was no need to be afraid of him. What was more, once he killed this kind of cultivator with high cultivation base, it would be an excellent tonic. If he could refine a Taoist master of Jindan stage into his 10,000 spirit blood pearl, his strength would double. At that time, not to mention the several cultivators of the Union of 10,000 Immortals, even if the elders came, unless they were Yuanying stage old monsters, he would still have a way to escape. With this thought in mind, Zheng Liming decided to make the first move. With a flick of his black robe, hundreds of blood skeletons shot out like raindrops. At the same time, he held the million spirits blood pearl in his hand, waiting for an opportunity. After all, his opponent was a perfected master in the elixir realm, so he didn't dare to be careless. Although the million spirits blood pearl was powerful, he only had one chance to challenge someone of a higher level. If he missed, he would die. On the other side, Wang Lu didn't care about Zheng Liming's bloody skeletons at all. With his current strength, even if he didn't use any magical power, he could still resist the impact of these bloody skeletons with his body alone. If he used his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi, he would be able to scatter that evil cultivator's soul. Since Wang Lu's debut, he had always been challenging others, or even more than one level. How could it be someone else's turn to challenge him? It was just that, now the situation was different. Wang Lu didn't want to show his real ability. Whether it was primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi or non-phase method, they had a small reputation in the current Wanxian League. To be honest, it was quite surprising that the evil cultivator in front of him didn't recognize him, the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect. Once he used his signature skill, the trace was obvious, but he didn't want to expose his whereabouts so simply. Therefore, he could only use some of his signature skills. It just so happened that there were quite a few unorthodox methods in Mr. Feng Yu's legacy. Although they were not qualified to replace primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi and non-phase method, they could be used as a useful supplement to the system of methods. Wang Lu had previously read them when he was shrinking his dantian, so at this time, he could use them. The methods in the legacy of the fallen immortal were mixed. There were righteous methods and evil methods. Previously, Wang Lu used an evil sword technique called Bone Transformation Sword to break through the blood curtain of the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl. At this time, facing the bloody skeletons that were like raindrops, he remembered that there was a demonic method called Blood Drinking Seclusion, which was a special blood method. Thus, he casually used it, and the more than 100 bloody skeletons immediately vanished into thin air. Wang Lu smiled and thought that although there were few top-notch goods in the legacy of the fallen immortal, these unorthodox methods were really interesting. If used at the right time, they would not belong to those immortal-level methods. By using these things in a comprehensive way, his adaptability could be improved. The legacy of the fallen immortal was really extraordinary. He had previously underestimated the value of these things. On the other side, Zheng Liming was simply scared out of his wits. Just now, the more than 100 bloody skeletons were connected to his original method. Although they were not as overbearing as the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl, he was confident that even Taoist Master King Pill would find it difficult to face them head-on. However, unexpectedly, the other party casually waved his hand and turned the skeletons into ashes. How could he face such an opponent head-on? Not to mention the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl, even if he had the blood-drinking river diagram, the most precious treasure of the blood-refining sect, he would still not be his opponent. Therefore, Zheng Liming immediately thought of retreating. However, even if he wanted to leave, Wang Lu did not want to let him go. More than 100 bone transformation swords formed a bone cage to stop Zheng Liming. Zheng Liming backhanded his hand and shot out the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl. A round red bead flew like a meteor. Tens of thousands of wronged souls lingered around the blood bead, strengthening its momentum. The 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl was indeed worthy of being the most precious treasure of the Devil Path. Before its body arrived, the bloody aura of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood had already rushed over, constantly interfering with the cultivator's primordial spirit jade mansion. Wang Lu did not hesitate. He directly took out his jade mansion and spat out the king pill, which collided with the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl. This unyielding move shocked Zheng Liming for a full breath of time in midair. The opportunity to escape that he had fought for by sacrificing the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl had slipped away. It wasn't that Zheng Liming was too stupid, it was just that this move was too bizarre. It must be known that a golden core cultivator's golden core could be said to be the lifeblood of a cultivator. Once it was damaged, their cultivation in the immortal Tao would go down the drain. Ordinary people would not even have enough time to protect it, let alone use it as a hidden weapon. Even if a monster spat out its Niden, it would only be used when it was desperate. Wang Lu's move simply refreshed Zheng Liming's worldview. The next moment, Zheng Liming's eyes, which had been opened to the limit, widened even more, and his eyeballs almost popped out of his eye sockets. Because right in front of him, the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl was broken into pieces after being penetrated by the king pill. Is this the king pill or a hidden weapon? How could there be such a sharp king pill in the world? In addition to the shock, Zheng Liming also felt hopeless. His opponent was far more powerful than he had imagined, and even the million spirits blood pearl had been destroyed. It could be said that he was doomed. Really, if he had known this, why did he care about what the coachman said? Wouldn't it be better to recuperate and then find a way to escape back to the sect? Now he was really seeking his own death. On the other side, Wang Lu also felt bored after making a successful move. After all, the opponent was too weak. The result of the whole process was that he basically gained nothing except for one skill proficiency. The only thing worth mentioning was that after the King Pill collided with the 10,000 Spirit Blood Pearl, the violent shock made the two cultivation methods in the King Pill further fuse. Although the degree of fusion was not high, it opened up a new idea for Wang Lu. If there was a chance in the future, he might as well use the King Pill to collide with something hard to see if it could further promote the fusion. While thinking about it, Wang Lu prepared the transformation bone sword to give Zhang Liming the final blow. After killing this evil cultivator whose hands were stained with blood, it would be his turn to run. In the short battle just now, he did not use any skills related to the Lingjian school. Unless the divination masters tried their best, they should not be able to figure out his origin. As long as Zhang Liming died, he believed that no one would be so bored to find out who killed him. In the area under the jurisdiction of the Wanxian League, everyone had the right to kill evil spirits. However, when Wang Lu pulled out his forearm bone and turned it into a pale bone sword, ready to cut off Zhang Liming's head, suddenly a starlight fell from the sky and fell directly on Zhang Liming's head. The starlight fell so fast that even Wang Lu was a little unprepared. He felt dizzy, and then he saw Zhang Liming's head flying high and blood splashing in the sky. Wang Lu was taken aback. This starlight descent was clearly an exceptionally powerful flying sword technique. Before he could react, that flying sword had already beheaded Zhang Liming. At that time, although Zhang Liming had somewhat abandoned himself to despair, his protective demonic method had yet to disperse, and the magical treasure-level blood corpse robe was still loyally protecting its master. As a result, when the sword light fell, the demonic skill and the robe all disintegrated. Zhang Liming's body was cut, and even his primordial spirit couldn't escape. In the blink of an eye, both his body and spirit were destroyed. This sword was strange and sharp, not inferior to Wang Lu's primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi. The purity of the sword intent seemed to be above Wang Lu's. After all, Wang Lu was good at both offense and defense, so the pure sword intent in full attack mode was still a bit worse. Wang Lu didn't think that he was invincible in the world. Right now, he was merely in the King Pill stage. There were countless sword cultivators in 9 regions who were more powerful than him, but there were not too many who could make that sword strike just now. And in his impression, with a slight tremble, Wang Lu saw a figure flash in front of him. A rainbow-like gorgeous figure of a girl appeared behind Zhang Liming's body, holding a starlight immortal sword that had just been washed clean of blood. The girl had delicate long hair, a bright and picturesque face, and a pair of sparkling eyes filled with endless curiosity about everything in the world. Seeing this face, Wang Lu almost fainted. He had calculated every possible way not to expose himself, especially not to be discovered by his fellow sect members. Unexpectedly, the person in front of him was someone he had been familiar with for many years. "Senior brother Wang Lu, how come it's you?" The girl named Luli blinked her eyes in disbelief at first, and then with a cheer, she threw herself at him like a swallow flying into the forest. Wang Lu's heart tightened. He immediately dodged backward and then pretended that he didn't know her. Men and women should not touch each other. "Benefactor, please show some respect." "Huh?" Luli curiously tilted her head, looked at Wang Lu, and then raised her head to think seriously. Finally, the girl clapped her hands and suddenly realized something. Then, Luli meticulously gave Wang Lu a salute and righteously said, "Luli pays respect to senior brother Wang Lu." "Hey, I don't want this kind of respect from you." Wang Lu said, "I think you probably mistook me for someone else." "Huh?" Luli looked incredulous as she covered her mouth, completely unable to accept the reality. Wang Lu coughed. "Perhaps I look similar to your senior brother. But as the saying goes, there must be 3 people with the same appearance in this world. So, you actually mistook me for someone else. My surname is Zhang Fan, and I'm a loose cultivator from the Southern Heaven region, Luli was stunned, and then, as if suddenly enlightened, she nodded and cautiously came closer. I know, senior brother, you're carrying out a secret mission, right? Luli will keep it a secret. Rest assured. Secret. Counting on Luli to keep it a secret was second only to counting on Wang Wu to be an upright person. Wang Lu sighed and casually asked, if someone asks you who you saw in busy mountain town, how would you answer? Secret. What secret? A secret that can't be told. Wang Lu raised his eyebrows. Not bad, I haven't seen you for several months, and you've made progress. Alright, let's exchange moves. Liuli, keeping a secret is a very important and difficult thing. I'm afraid you can't do it alone. I'm willing to help you keep the secret. Alright. But you have to tell me what the secret is first, then I can help you keep it. Oh. The secret is that I've seen senior brother Wang Lu. You mustn't tell anyone. Wang Lu sneered helplessly. After all, she was Luli. Chapter 542. Luli's problem was really difficult to solve. Because of some reasons that were inconvenient to be pointed out directly out of politeness, it was simply a fantasy to expect this child to keep the secret. Wang Lu had trained her for many years, and at present, there was only one way that could make Luli keep the secret. Silence the witness. Of course, this trick was not feasible at all. No matter how crazy Wang Lu was, it was impossible for him to lay his hands on little Luli. However, he couldn't just leave her alone. Otherwise, it wouldn't be long before the entire Lingjian school knew that he had come back. And he was not ready to go back to the mountain. The problem seemed to be in a deadlock, but if the problem could not be solved in a positive way, the reverse solution would also be the same. Since Luli could not keep the secret, then Luli would also become a part of the secret. In short, wouldn't it be fine as long as Luli didn't return to the mountain? However, before that, he had to figure out why Luli came to Empty Mang's city. Master asked me to come. Uncle Zhou. What did he ask you to come for? Luli took out a piece of paper and read it word by word: slay the demon, uphold justice, and contribute to the development of the just cause of Wanxian League. What did he tell you in private? Luli said with a smile, he told me to hunt down a cultivator of blood refining sect, and then take his token back to Plentiful City to receive the reward as my experiential learning. Oh, bounty hunter. Wang Lu immediately understood. This was the bounty hunting order issued by the Plentiful City Management Committee. Since the rise of Plentiful City, the Southern Heaven region could be said to be a gathering of winds and clouds, dragons and snakes mixed together. Needless to say, super sects like Xingjing sect and Lingjian school, even some cultivators from lower rank sects had come to the Southern Heaven region to look for gold. However, with more people came more trouble. Many evil cultivators took the opportunity to fish in troubled waters and stir up trouble. This young cultivator from blood refining sect was one of them. Nowadays, although righteous cultivators were the mainstream in 9 regions, the number of evil cultivators was also quite large. Although the upper echelons of Plentiful City's management committee were powerful, it was impossible for them to take care of everything. Therefore, the usual way to deal with evil cultivators around Plentiful City was to issue bounty hunting orders and hire civilian experts with a high reward to hunt them down. In any case, although Plentiful City's human resources were tight, it never lacked money. As soon as the bounty hunting order was issued, many lively civilian organizations sprang up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Apart from dealing a severe blow to the evil cultivators, it also added a lot of trouble. However, for the elite disciples of the big sects, this was a good opportunity for actual combat experience. Those who could be posted on the bounty hunting list by the administrative committee were basically the elites among the evil cultivators. They had endless means, and their life-saving abilities were especially strong. And to deal with these people, it was appropriate to send the elites of the righteous path. As one of the top 3 disciples of Lingjian school, Luli naturally had this kind of experiential learning. Did Uncle Master set a time limit for you to return? Lu Li shook her head. No, he just told me to be careful. I can't eat food from strangers, I can't drink water from strangers, I can't flip through ancient books, and I can't spend money recklessly. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu's heart was filled with compassion, thinking, Uncle Master, you've really troubled yourself with such a disciple. Then, during my absence, what's the situation on the mountain? Lu Li happily smiled. Very good. The Carefree Peak has invited a new chef and launched a lot of new dishes. I mean, did the elders say anything about me? I haven't returned to the mountain for such a long time, Lu Li said. Oh, at first, sect leader Uncle was very worried. He even convened the sect leader's office meeting to discuss whether or not to find a way to set up the heavenly cycle great array and use the stellar diffraction technique to search and rescue you. Later on, Fifth Uncle suggested that if we have that budget, we might as well use it to build a luxurious office building for Non-Phase Peak, saying that you must have run away from home because of the dilapidated Non-Phase Peak. As long as the house is decorated magnificently, plus there's a beauty in the room, it would certainly attract you back. And then? Later on, they seemed to have a quarrel, and then the matter was left unsettled. Wang Lu nodded. She's indeed my good master. If something really happened to me, I can count on her to kill me. Speaking to this, thinking of the pure and introverted little girl in his dream, Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh with emotion. This time was really an inhumane refinement blessing plus the 17 Dragon Slayer sword. The current Wang Wu was simply unrecognizable. In addition to this, is there any other change in the sect? Lu Li thought for a moment and then said, everyone misses you. Wang Lu curiously asked, everyone? According to his understanding, his popularity in the sect wasn't bad, but it wasn't that good either. Because he had never spent too much time on interpersonal relationships. Except for the few people that he interacted with on a daily basis, most of the cultivators in the sect only nodded their heads at him. Now, after not seeing him for a few months, unexpectedly, everyone missed him very much. Yes, last month, they just held a gathering and went to the Non-Phase Peak to lay a wreath for you. Lay a wreath? Lu Li nodded. Yes, there are also a lot of magical tools, magical treasures, spirit stones, and so on. They said that it's used to express their grief. The more precious the gift, the more sincere the grief. That day, I also went and brought you a bag of flying red clouds candy. Really loyal. Knowing that flying red cloud candy bun was Lu Li's favorite food in recent times, Wang Lu touched Lu Li's head, which made the girl particularly pleased. He then asked, is this my master's idea? Yes, it was proposed by Fifth Aunt. She said that you're the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect, so everyone should express their gratitude. Although I didn't quite understand what she meant, after she proposed it, the atmosphere on the mountain became heavy for several days. Wang Lu sneered. Wang Wu, don't let me catch you when I go back. However, on the other hand, since Wang Wu, that scoundrel, had the leisure to do this kind of thing, she probably really believed that nothing would happen to him. Speaking of which, the trust between master and disciple was really touching. Very well, in short, basically, nothing big happened in the sect, so it's not bad. Next. Wang Lu touched Lu Li's head again. Do you want to play with me for 2 days? Okay. Lu Li was elated and then summoned her flying sword. How do you want to play? In the past, when they were on the mountain, the most common entertainment for the two was sword fight. Because until Wang Lu advanced to the King Pill, his and Lu Li's cultivation base was almost the same, and the gap in their comprehensive strength was also negligible. It could be said that they were evenly matched, and after every sword fight, they benefited a lot from each other. Now, although Wang Lu had a fortuitous encounter to advance to the King Pill first, so his strength was one step ahead, but that sword fight also showed that during this period of time, Lu Li's cultivation base had also advanced by leaps and bounds, so she wasn't left too far behind and was still at the same level as Wang Lu. Wang Lu's heart was moved, secretly thinking that sword fight with Lu Li was actually a good idea. Right now, whether it was shrinking or fusing, actual combat experience was an excellent catalyst. Especially since Lu Li's brilliant sword intent was even purer than his, it was the most suitable to temper himself in actual combat. However, just as Wang Lu was about to nod his head, suddenly, the king pill in his jade mansion trembled, as if it had a vague reaction with something. A moment later, a flash of light flew over from the horizon like lightning. A long-haired elegant sword cultivator floated down, and as soon as he landed, he cupped his hands in salute. I am Qi Xianying, disciple of Red Pine Mountain's reaching firmament palace. Greetings, fellow Taoist. Wang Lu looked at him, but he didn't hurry to return the salute. Instead, there was a bit of banter in his eyes. The Red Pine Mountain's reaching firmament palace was a famous high-rank sect in 9 regions, second only to the 5 uniques. Its headquarters was located in the Southern Heaven region, but it had branches in other regions. Its influence in the entire continent was even above that of Lingjian School. And Qi Xianying was the current lead disciple of reaching firmament palace. He had been cultivating for 50 years, and his cultivation base was at the peak of King Pill, which could be said to be powerful. Under the tacit approval of his sect, he had managed a considerable force, which was quite famous in the Southern Heaven region. Therefore, many people no longer regarded him as a disciple, but as a local tyrant. A year ago, when he met with the lead disciple of Xingjing's sect, Qianghua, he was neither servile nor overbearing, and even had a pleasant conversation. After that conversation, Qi Xianying's reputation became even more prominent, so much so that even Wang Lu had heard of his name. However, this was actually not the point. Let alone a mere lead disciple of reaching firmament palace, even if Qianghua herself was here, Wang Lu was too lazy to even look at her. It was really the purpose of this Qi Xianying's visit that made Wang Lu feel a little ridiculous. Because it was ridiculous, he unceremoniously laughed. This laughter made Qi Xianying somewhat inexplicable and somewhat annoyed. In his opinion, his manners were already there, but the lead disciple of Lingjian School was unexpectedly rude. Fellow Taoist, you, Wang Lu unceremoniously interrupted him, don't pretend. What are you thinking? Do you think I can't see through it? This Mtimang is the famous Blind Mountain, and it has been many years since a cultivator came here. Zheng Liming came here specifically to escape. I am just taking things as they come. Lu Li is here for Zheng Liming, and you, what are you doing here? Qi Xianying frowned and opened his mouth. Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted. You are the lead disciple of reaching Firmament Palace, so you don't have the time to come here for an outing. Zheng Liming is just a +6 peak Shudan, far from being qualified for you, a +8 peak King Pill. So, don't tell me you came here for me. Upon hearing this, Qi Xianying finally understood the meaning of Wang Lu's words. Thinking of the consistent and almost unreasonable strong style of this lead disciple of Spirit Sword sect, he could only sigh. Yes, I did come here for junior sister Lu Li. Wang Lu nodded. Then you can go now. Qi Xianying somewhat incredulously stared at Wang Lu, but found that the other party's eyes were unusually calm and seemed to be serious. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Qi Xianying said, "There's probably some misunderstanding here. Wang Lu sneered, "You're just doing your duty as a host, willing to lead the way for your junior sister, but in reality, you're just an idiot. My Lu Li has only been cultivating for more than 20 years, in our immortal cultivation world, she's not even a budding lowly. You, an uncle who has been cultivating for 50 years, better not think too much." Having said this, it was no different from shedding all pretense of cordiality, but Qi Xianying still maintained his self-restraint and said, As a result, he was interrupted before he could finish. He saw Wang Lu reach out his hand and touch Lu Li's head. "Take a bath and go to sleep, lead disciple of reaching Firmament Palace, this cabbage has long been mine." Chapter 543. Facing Wang Lu, Qi Xianying felt an unprecedented irritation. He had been cultivating for 50 years and had seen all kinds of people. Even the aloof Qianghua fairy could talk and laugh with him, but he had never seen a person like Wang Lu. No wonder in the circle, Wang Lu's reputation was the most controversial. However, this was not necessarily a bad opportunity. The meeting between the lead disciple of Reaching Firmament Palace and the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect would certainly attract a lot of attention in the Wanxian League. At that time, the performance of both sides would be seen by others. One side was crafty and rude, while the other side was courteous. The difference between them was obvious. Qi Xianying would not deliberately use others to build his own influence, but if he could conveniently do it, he would never refuse. Living in the shadow of the five uniques, a top-rank sect must have its own way of survival. I think. In the face of Wang Lu's aggressive attitude, Qi Xianying stabilized his footing and was ready to insist that all this was a misunderstanding. However, when his eyes fell on Lu Li's contented face, which was touched by Wang Lu, his heart was moved. Misunderstanding? Hey, in Plentiful City, people with discerning eyes would know that this was not a misunderstanding. A few months ago, when I met Lu Li in Plentiful City, I was amazed by her. This matter was almost known to everyone in the circle. If I insist that it was a misunderstanding again and again, it would be nothing more than deceiving myself. Moreover, wouldn't that mean that in front of the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect, the lead disciple of Reaching Firmament Palace wouldn't even have the courage to tell the truth? It's not like it's something immoral. Both of us are free. I, Qi Xianying, am pursuing her openly. What's so shameful about it? At this time, even if I tell the truth, so what? You, Wang Lu, are just her senior brother, not her Daoist companion. How could you care that much? Therefore, Qi Xianying calmed his eyes and said with a smile, junior sister Lu Li is innocent and kind, and her grace is outstanding. I do love her. I'm not interested in what you think. Wang Lu interrupted, Lu Li has already been contracted by me, you go find other people to love her. Your Excellency really likes to joke. People are not goods, just because you say contracted. Wang Lu sneered and said, so what if I'm contracted? You can sue me. Qi Xianying said, don't you think that such a declaration is too domineering and doesn't respect the subjective will of the parties involved? Subjective will? What a joke. Wang Lu shook his head and then asked Lu Li, tell me, in your opinion, what kind of character is this Qi Xianying? Lu Li turned around and looked at Qi Xianying. The latter smiled and nodded in a generous manner. Senior brother Qi is a good person. Wang Lu laughed and said, did you hear that? Keep the good guy card and leave. With that, Wang Lu glanced at him as if he was looking at an idiot, then pulled Lu Li's hand and turned around to leave. This. Qi Xianying refused to give up. In fact, he was somewhat encouraged. He didn't have a long contact with Lu Li, but she was a good person. Obviously, it meant that he had left a good impression on her, and if it could continue to develop. Of course, with Wang Lu around, things would not go so smoothly, which he had expected a few months ago. At that time, the news of the disappearance of the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect had just spread in the circle, and it just so happened that he began to try to get in touch with Lu Li. Thus, someone around him said that if he made a move against Lu Li at this time, he would be suspected of taking advantage of her. However, Qi Xianying retorted that not only did Wang Lu and Lu Li not have a marriage agreement, they didn't even have any love between man and woman. Even if Wang Lu was still there, he didn't avoid it, so he couldn't take advantage of her. Having said that, in fact, Qi Xianying had already expected that if Wang Lu really disappeared, then that would be fine. But once he came back, he would inevitably become an obstacle in front of Lu Li. He and Lu Li were indeed not in a romantic relationship, at least not yet. According to his private understanding from the people of Beast Master School, the relationship between the two was more like a master-servant relationship. But in fact, this kind of relationship was even worse. Qi Xianying had cultivated for 50 years, and he had seen too many emotional things. Most of the obstacles did not come from the two people who loved each other, but from the family behind the two people. And no matter how he looked at it, Wang Lu's performance was like a tricky and unreasonable mother-in-law. Seeing that Wang Lu was about to take Lu Li away, Qi Xianying hurriedly shouted, "Fellow Daoist, please wait." Although this move was reckless, it was also Qi Xianying's last resort. If he really let Wang Lu go like this, he would never see Lu Li again. In his 50 years of cultivation, this was the first time that he was moved by a woman. If things were to go down the drain like this, perhaps it would form a heart demon that could not be dispelled for decades. Therefore, even if it would make Wang Lu feel disgusted, he couldn't care less. Who knew that Wang Lu's reaction was bigger than he expected? He did stop, but when he turned his head, a sharp sword qi that shook Qi Xianying's primordial spirit came at him. At this moment, Qi Xianying's strength as the lead disciple of reaching Firmament Palace fully erupted. Purple qi lingered in his jade mansion, and the king pill that had been tempered to its peak state was fully sublimated under the brewing of the purple qi, condensing into an indeterminate little person. Once the human form was formed, all of Qi Xianying's magical power was activated. An immortal aura filled his whole body, and the surrounding spiritual energy was fully activated. This was impressively a Yuanying stage-level magical ability. Using the King Pill stage to drive the Yuanying stage-level magical ability, Qi Xianying's strength was fully displayed. Although this kind of cross-stage magical ability could only be used for a moment and could only be used once, it was often this one move that could determine the outcome of the battle. However, in the face of the sword qi that came at him, Qi Xianying didn't even dare to think about the outcome of the battle. At the last moment, he only had enough time to turn his Yuanying stage-level immortal aura into a sparkling and translucent red pine tree in front of him. That was not only the life source spiritual treasure given to him by the master of reaching Firmament Palace, who was also his master, but also the supreme magical ability of the Yuanying stage immortal spirit transformation. The next moment, the sword qi erupted, and the red pine tree violently trembled. Tens of thousands of pine needles fell down like a rainstorm. The straight trunk was pressed inward, and the branches were torn apart, as if they were about to break. Before this spirit tree had the time to display more of its magical ability, most of its magical ability had already been dispelled. As for Qi Xianying himself, he felt a huge shock in his jade mansion. His newly condensed Yuanying collapsed and scattered, turning into a mass of violent purple gas that rampaged inside his body. He had to use all of his strength to barely suppress it. However, at least, it was blocked. On the other side, Wang Lu was also surprised. His primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi was actually blocked. This was somewhat unexpected. It must be known that just now, he didn't use his finger as a sword, nor did he use the sword of Mount Kuan as a medium. Instead, he casually pulled out Lu Li's sword, Skybreaker, which was also the weapon that the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi should go with. Its power was more than twice as strong as its normal state. Let alone a mere peak king pill, even if it was a valuable low-level Yuanying, it would still be cut down by this sword strike. Of course, in view of the side effect of the weapon, Wang Lu immediately returned the sword to Lu Li. Moreover, that sword strike just now also made him feel that his jade mansion was empty, which was difficult to reappear in a short period of time. Not bad, you have a bit of skill. Wang Lu nodded and retracted his primal chaos sword qi. He didn't take advantage of the opponent's absent-minded primordial spirit to hit him while he was down. As a matter of fact, from the beginning, he didn't have much opinion on Qi Xianying. The charm of Lu Li, this healing angel, was beyond doubt. It was normal for people to fall in love with her. Qi Xianying was just one of the braver ones. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, there was no big problem in etiquette. Although there was a big gap between him and Lu Li in terms of cultivation age, with Lu Li's peerless aptitude. Most of the people with similar cultivation time as her were still far away from Shudan stage. How could this kind of noob afford to climb up to her? It was too far-fetched to use age as a limit. It was just that, when he spoke just now, Wang Lu's mood was extremely bad. When he came back from the demon world, his heart was full of heaviness. He intended to dispel his irritation through cultivation, but as soon as he entered the state, he was interrupted by the evil cultivator Zheng Liming. When he went down the mountain to vent his anger on Zheng Liming, after a lot of hard work, in the end, his head was taken away by Lu Li. Wang Lu had always been extremely fond of Lu Li, but there was a difference. Lu Li's outer sky flying immortal sword strike was, after all, a head snatcher. The hostility in Wang Lu's heart hadn't disappeared, and he didn't want to vent his anger on little Lu Li. Thus, he proposed a sword fight. As a result, before the sword fight started, another reckless person came over and asked Lu Li to be his opponent. Even if he wanted to court death, there was no such thing as this. Wang Lu had good self-restraint by not turning hostile on the spot. As a result, when Qi Xianying said the forbidden words, "Fellow Daoist, please stay," Heaven's shocking sword could no longer hold back and made his move. Of course, at the last moment, Wang Lu still held back. The killing intent in the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi was very little. Even if this sword strike couldn't be blocked, it wouldn't kill him. However, in the end, Qi Xianying still managed to block it. After this sword strike, Qi Xianying's look at Wang Lu changed. He had long heard that the strength of the lead disciple of Spirit Sword sect was against the heaven, but unexpectedly, it was really against the heaven. He was 2 levels ahead of him in terms of stage, but he couldn't even block his sword strike. Under such a big gap, it was really disheartening. Therefore, even though after that sword strike, Wang Lu's hostility had disappeared and he began to put on a friendly posture, Qi Xianying still couldn't muster up his energy. "Senior brother Wang Lu's swordsmanship is superb, I am ashamed of my inferiority." This was the first time that Qi Xianying called Wang Lu his senior brother, which also meant that he sincerely admitted his defeat. The two of them were both the lead disciples of their respective sects, and their stage was similar. Thus, he, who had been cultivating for a longer time, should be his senior brother. However, in immortal cultivation, the strong were respected. After experiencing that sword strike just now, Qi Xianying absolutely didn't dare to put on the airs of a senior brother. However, although he lost in cultivation, he couldn't lose in emotional matters. Qi Xianying clenched his teeth and earnestly pleaded, "In terms of cultivation, perhaps I have no hope to compare with you in this life, but I still hope that you can give me a chance." Wang Lu was shocked, thinking, this kid's face is so thick that it defies the heaven. Just now, he was beaten to the point that he almost spat out his sh*t, but now, he actually turned around and put on a posture of proposing marriage to his father-in-law? "You?" Wang Lu tentatively asked, "Just now, when I drove the sword Qi with Skybreaker, did I accidentally hurt your brain?" "No, I'm very sober, I'm serious." Qi Xianying's eyes were shining. "You, serious?" Wang Lu suddenly pondered, glanced at Qi Xianying from the corner of his eyes, and more felt that his sword strike just now might have caused some irreparable loss of IQ. Thinking that the other party didn't make any big mistake from the beginning to the end, he couldn't help but feel that he should compensate the other party. However, the other party was thinking about Lu Li, so he couldn't just compensate him with little Lu Li, right? After thinking about it, he could only, "How about this, I have an ancestral meat lingji mushroom here, I'll give it to you." Chapter 544. Qi Xianying looked at the so-called flesh lingji mushroom handed over by Wang Lu with great sincerity and confusion, and inwardly guessed what this thing was for. But soon, he changed his mind and no longer thought about these chores. Business was more important. "Senior brother Wang Lu, with all due respect," Qi Xianying said, "your strength, intelligence, and temperament are the best among your peers, and you and junior sister Lu Li have a foundation of affection. If I compete with you, you don't need to open your mouth, and I will not overestimate myself. However, since you have no intention to become junior sister Lu Li's Daoist companion, and even don't have much affection between a man and a woman, then I hope you can give me a chance." Wang Lu was stunned. He was not surprised by the other party's thick face, but by the other party's explanation. There was not much affection between a man and a woman, which was actually true. Although he doted on Lu Li, at least until today, he had never thought about becoming Lu Li's Daoist companion. Of course, having no idea at present did not mean that he could let it go at will. First, as a senior brother, he had the obligation to take care of Lu Li so that she would not be deceived by scoundrels. Second, resources could be reserved. It was just that, this was just his own thought. In the eyes of outsiders, it might not necessarily be so. He had also heard a lot of rumors about him and Lu Li. How could Qi Xianying be so confident that he had no idea about Lu Li at present? Because I can see a person's marriage and love fate. Qi Xianying replied. Marriage and love fate? Qi Xianying somewhat helplessly said, This is one of the special skills of Red Pine Mountain's Reaching Firmament Palace. However, Reaching Firmament Palace is a small sect, probably not in senior brother Wang Lu's eyes. One of the core methods of our sect is to observe the cause and effect between people. And among them, marriage and love fate are the areas that we are best at. Wang Lu really didn't pay much attention to the method of Reaching Firmament Palace before. Listening to Qi Xianying's explanation, he reasonably speculated, in other words, it's pimping? Qi Xianying couldn't catch his breath. At the same time, he was considering whether he should fight to the death with the other party for the honor of his sect. It was just that, thinking about the sword strike that scattered his Yuanying, Qi Xianying really couldn't bring himself to fight for a short time, so he continued to explain softly. In my opinion, the lines of marriage and love between people are real. The so-called marriage fate line refers to who one is legally fated to marry. Because the rights and laws affect the mysteries of heaven and earth, they are usually clear and distinguishable. For example, senior brother Wang Lu does not have any marriage fate line on you. Wang Lu nodded. I am indeed unmarried. And the love line is more complicated. You have feelings for others, and others have feelings for you. It will all be reflected in one person. It was just that this kind of thought was sometimes a secret hidden in the bottom of a person's heart. Sometimes, that person didn't even realize that they had already given their heart to someone else. Therefore, it was difficult to see clearly the lines of love. In particular, I can't see through those with powerful primordial spirits. Usually, I can only see the love lines of those below the same realm. And then? Qi Xianying sighed and said, Senior brother Wang Lu is indeed a top figure in the world. There are quite a lot of love lines involved in him. Some of them even come from cultivators of higher realms. I can barely see them, but I can't see the direction of their love lines. Of course, among these love lines, there are indeed some that come from junior sister Lu Li. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu smiled and touched little Lu Li's head. I really didn't dote on you in vain. Qi Xianying sighed again. It's just that this love line is too clear. It means that although junior sister Lu Li's feelings for you are sincere, they are also ignorant, which is quite different from the love between men and women. It's more inclined to the familial aspect. Wang Lu coldly humphed but didn't speak. He inwardly thought, isn't this nonsense? Lu Li's physical health education class has never been held for various reasons, so what the hell does she know about the love between men and women? However, more importantly, I don't see any love line for Lu Li in you at all. Although there is a love line, it's more inclined to the familial aspect, so, Wang Lu said, so you want to try your luck? Qi Xianying sternly said, I have a sincere affection for junior sister Lu Li, not to try my luck. Unfortunately, she is already taken, so no matter how sincere you are, it doesn't make sense. Already taken? I'm afraid this excuse. I'm not referring to myself. Wang Lu explained, although Lu Li is contracted by me, no one stipulates that the contractor must produce for their own use. I am indeed in charge of her marriage, and I have already found a man for her. What? Qi Xianying was shocked. In his heart, he couldn't help but wonder if this was Wang Lu's excuse. Because in his view, the most important love line for Lu Li was connected to Wang Lu. Besides him, who else could be worthy to be the owner of Lu Li? Who, is it? Then, in Qi Xianying's surprised, suspicious, and expectant eyes, Wang Lu reported the answer. That person's name is Zhu Shiyao. Zhu Shiyao? Qi Xianying was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered. Your sex big sister? Unexpectedly, that dead otaku girl actually has a big reputation in the industry. Wang Lu shook his head and then said, it's her. She is deeply in love with Lu Li, unable to extricate herself. The two of them have already forged a deep friendship, so I can't allow you to step in. Qi Xianying was so shocked that he felt as if stars were shining before his eyes. This is impossible, Wang Lu said, since you can see the love line, you should be able to see the strong feelings of Lu Li. Qi Xianying gawked and then carefully looked. Indeed, he could see that Lu Li was involved in the love line of countless people. It was just that, most of them were involved in a distance that could not be seen by his eyes, so whether it belonged to Zhu Shiyao or not was not clear. Moreover, the key issue was not this. Isn't Zhu Shiyao a woman? Wang Lu blinked. So what if she's a woman? Haven't you heard of Lily? Lily? In short, it's a beautiful lesbian. Actually, Lu Li also likes women. That's impossible. Why is it impossible? If it weren't because she likes women, do you think she would have such a faint feeling for me? With my peerless aptitude, I'm afraid there's no woman who wouldn't be tempted by me. Qi Xianying had no time to refute this incredibly thick-skinned statement. His mind was still immersed in the Lily theory. This, a relationship between a woman and a woman, this is simply absurd. Wang Lu said, what's so absurd about it? Although they are both women, they are, after all, human beings. There's a beast master school in your southern heaven region, where many people even play with spirit beasts. What do you say about this? Qi Xianying suddenly felt ashamed that Reaching Firmament Palace and Beast Master School were both immortal cultivation sects in the southern heaven region. So, no matter how sincere and touching your love is, I can only tell you that you found the wrong person. Sister Lu Li is already taken. You're young, and your cultivation base is not bad. You still have a great future ahead of you, so there's no need to hang yourself on this tree. If you want a partner, I can introduce you to the beauties of Yin and Yang school. Qi Xianying helplessly smiled and didn't answer. The beauties of Yin and Yang school were indeed good. It was unknown how many male cultivators in the Wanxian League dreamed of winning their favor. However, the vision of the lead disciple of Reaching Firmament Palace was different from others. Moreover, for him, if it wasn't Lu Li, anyone else was meaningless. I understand, but I will not give up. Qi Xianying said in a deep voice. His tone was very firm. He. For this declaration, Wang Lu didn't take it to heart at all. The so-called not giving up was nothing more than an expression. With that big killer Lily, how could he not give up? If you have the ability, go and do a transformation surgery for me. Then let's wait and see. Today, I'll take my leave first. By the way, after you go back, remember not to spread the news that I'm together with Lu Li. Wang Lu unceremoniously put forward his request. Got it. With that, Qi Xianying turned around and left. Looking at Qi Xianying's receding figure, Wang Lu knew that he had finally solved this not-so-big problem. However, thinking about the marriage line that he just showed, Wang Lu always felt that he seemed to have ignored something. Oh, by the way, he actually forgot to take the flesh Ganoderma. Such a good prop, but he didn't care about it. Is he really going to do a transformation surgery? After sending away Qi Xianying and ending this episode, Wang Lu was finally able to live a comfortable life with Lu Li as planned. For Wang Lu, since the little angel Lu Li had come, it was impossible for him to let her go. The bounty hunting task assigned to her by the Plentiful City Committee was directly confirmed by Wang Lu using his committee members' authority. Thus, Lu Li instantly became a free person. Together with Wang Lu, she left Mount Mang and went all the way to a more desolate and remote place. Mount Mang was, after all, not a place for cultivation. For Wang Lu, who had basically adapted to the King Pill stage, it was fine. However, Lu Li's brilliant sword-heart physique particularly rejected this kind of blind spot of surrounding spiritual energy, so she could not cultivate here. The two of them traveled aimlessly in the southern heaven region. Sometimes they crossed mountains and ridges, sometimes they enjoyed the delicious food in the bustling city, and then they had a sword duel every few days. Their days were very pleasant. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. Wang Lu's King Pill stage had finally been completely stabilized, and the fusion of non-phase method and primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi had also reached a small success. The progress was even faster than the initial plan, and Lu Li's contribution couldn't go unnoticed. With or without a sparring partner, the efficiency was completely different. However, the real role of Lu Li was not just a good sparring partner. Compared to the harvest in cultivation, the change in Wang Lu's stage was more important. After 2 months of comfortable life, he finally walked out of the tragic dream of transmigration and found the direction of his future. "Senior brother, are we still not going back to the mountain?" While eating, Lu Li somewhat hesitantly asked, "We've been away from the mountain for so long, wouldn't Master be worried?" Rest assured, if they were really worried, they would have already come to look for people. "Do you think the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall would really feel relieved to send you to Plentiful City as a bounty hunter?" Huh? Lu Li was somewhat puzzled. Wang Lu didn't explain too much. While eating, he said to Lu Li, "In 2 days, let's go back to Plentiful City." Chapter 545. The Tomb of Immortals in Fengdu City was targeted by Wang Lu as his next destination. After spending a few months to sort himself out, Wang Lu began to take action seriously. In addition to awakening his previous life's consciousness, the other important significance of that time travel dream was that it made Wang Lu aware of the existence of a great crisis. Therefore, he could no longer do things as casually and aimlessly as before. Before the time travel dream, Wang Lu actually didn't have much urgency in cultivation. His status in Lingjian school was special, and he had already become famous even before he reached the small success stage of non-phase method. After defeating Qiong Hua in one fell swoop in the battle for the 5-blood spirit crown, Wang Lu had faintly established his position as the #1 person among his peers. Thus, the motivation to continue to move forward would naturally be lacking. At the same time, for cultivators with void spirit root, the highest dream of cultivators, ascending to immortality was basically an inevitability. As long as he cultivated step by step, ascending to immortality was a matter of course. Therefore, there was no need for Wang Lu to be anxious in cultivation. Plus, the overall environment of 9 regions was peaceful and comfortable. Therefore, he had always been relatively casual in doing things. Many times, he was pushed by things instead of actively looking for things to do, because there was no need. But now the situation was different. The threat of the fallen immortals was like a sword hanging over his head, and with his current strength, he was afraid that he was not even qualified to be cannon fodder. In the Great War of Immortals, everyone below the level of Supreme was like an ant, and a mere King Pill was not even qualified to be a guest in the art troupe to play cute and send warmth to the front line. Therefore, speeding up the progress of cultivation was an inevitable choice. As for the methods to speed up the progress of cultivation, there were only 2. The first one was the safest: return to Spirit Sword Mountain, ask the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall to help him find a place with rich spiritual energy, occupy it, and then do a closed-door training. After a few decades, when he came out, he would at least be a Daoist master of Yuanying stage. However, there were 2 problems with this method. First, although the Lingjian school still had abundant spiritual vein resources, there were also a lot of people who needed the spiritual vein to cultivate, such as the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall, Lu Li, Zhu Shiyao, and the other successor disciples of the Misty Peak, as well as some other cultivators who were separated from the disciples but still cultivated on the mountain. Second, reaching Yuanying stage in several decades was too slow. Although it was better than a certain non-phase peak master who hadn't reached Yuanying stage in 200 years, it was still far from meeting the needs of Wang Lu. In that case, he could only take the second path, to seek a breakthrough in actual combat. This path had always been regarded as a shortcut for geniuses. As long as the aptitude and perception were high enough, the life was big enough, and they were not afraid of the karma of killing, then a life and death test could indeed make people's strength advance by leaps and bounds. The best example in history was immortal Qin and great ancestor Disheng, the two people who ascended to immortality in just 20 years of cultivation. Such an appalling cultivation speed, in addition to their void spirit root, the most important reason was that they rose in troubled times. From the moment they set foot on the road of immortal cultivation, they were involved in the flames of war, which lasted for almost 20 years without a break. And when the war subsided, they had already ascended to immortality. Unfortunately, the theme of today's 9 regions was peace and development, so it was difficult to find a huge battlefield where people could fight for 20 years. Fortunately, a group of immortal tombs was unearthed in the southern heaven region. The endless copies provided endless battlefields. As long as the cultivation state was switched to the wartime state, one could obtain huge benefits from the battles. Of course, in addition to the above reasons, Wang Lu also had other purposes. The news of him and Lu Li should have already been passed back to the mountain. During this time, there was no movement on Spirit Sword Mountain. Obviously, they had guessed that Wang Lu had some difficulties, so they waited for him to take the initiative to return to the mountain. However, Wang Lu asked himself that he was not ready to reunite with them, especially her. Moreover, it seemed that it would not be easy to prepare in a short period of time. However, always floating outside was not a long-term solution, especially since the master of Non-Phase Peak had always been impatient. It was estimated that it would not be long before she came to find him. Therefore, it was better to go to the group of immortal tombs in Plentiful City to hide. In the independent copy, no matter how great her ability was, it would be useless, ha ha ha. When Wang Lu made up his mind to go to the group of immortal tombs in Plentiful City, on the Red Pine Mountain in the southern heaven region, Xiao Baya, the master of Reaching Firmament Palace, deeply frowned. His eyes were full of helplessness. Xianying still refuses to come out. In front of Xiao Baya, a woman who looked to be in her 30s with a flirtatious expression gently shook her head. He still refuses. He said that he will not come out until he breaks through this tribulation. Xiao Baya was silent for a moment, and then asked, "Then did you tell him that it was my order for him to come out?" The woman said, "He said that after he comes out, he will come to you to offer a humble apology." Bastard! Xiao Baya flew into a rage. In a split second, the thousands of red pine trees outside Reaching Firmament Palace swayed, and the red pine needles became crystal clear, as if they were weeping blood. Offer a humble apology? Offer a humble apology to me, his master? Who wants him to offer a humble apology? What's the use of offering a humble apology? He is the lead disciple of Reaching Firmament Palace, and every word and deed is the model for the disciples of the palace. Now, everyone knows that my words as the palace master have no weight. When the woman heard Xiao Baya's roar, she suddenly raised her eyebrows. Isn't it because you spoil him so much that he is lawless? Usually, he doesn't have the slightest majesty as a master. Even the most precious red pine tree of Reaching Firmament Palace has been given to him, and you can't wait to announce that he will inherit the position of palace master. Even when you are with him, you don't put on any airs. Now you expect your words to have weight. How is that possible? Humph, that year, master evaluated you and said that you are competent to be the palace master of Reaching Firmament Palace, but you are not a qualified teacher. This is indeed true. Xiao Baya's face turned red from being refuted. After a long silence, he stood up. I'll go pull him out. Forget it. The woman pulled Xiao Baya back again. He is now in a closed-door training. If this tribulation of emotions is not over, you can forcibly pull him out, but you will just pull out a walking corpse. Otherwise, do you think I will leave him alone and come back alone? Alas, tell me, is this tribulation of emotions really so difficult? You're spouting nonsense. Xiao Baya glared at her. You also cultivate the cultivation method of Reaching Firmament Palace. For cultivators of Reaching Firmament Palace, don't you know what the tribulation of emotions means? The woman shrugged her shoulders. I didn't feel that the tribulation of emotions that year was difficult. After my vows of eternal love were broken up by the elders, I was forced to marry you. You see, it only took me half a month to adjust to such a big setback. You. Xiao Baiya suddenly became even more annoyed, but looking at his wife who had a cold relationship with him, he did not know what to say for a long time, and finally helplessly deflated. In short, what are you going to do with this traitorous disciple? I can't just leave him alone. Xianying's aptitude and temperament are too extreme, he can't rely on himself to cross the tribulation of emotions. Xiao Baiya pondered for a long time. So, I have to take action. You take action? Don't tell me. Well, the knot in his heart is that it's rare for him to be moved and want to pursue a person, but he was defeated without a fight. His feelings have not yet begun and it has already ended, which makes him unwilling. Xianying is not a narrow-minded villain. If he is defeated in a fair competition, it will only make his mind more mature. But now, he has walked into a dead end, so I have to pull him out. How? Xiao Baiya was silent for a moment, and then said, help him create a fair competition opportunity. Don't tell me you want to use the marriage chart? Are you crazy? Do you know how much backlash you will suffer if you interfere with the marriage of cultivators, especially the cultivators of other sects? Moreover, that person is a successor disciple of Lingjian's school. Even if her cultivation base is still shallow, she represents one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. If someone finds out, you don't want your life. Xiao Baiya said, of course, I will not overestimate myself and forcibly interfere with other people's marriage. In fact, I can't interfere, but what if I push the boat along with the current in a certain matter? While speaking, Xiao Baiya took down a thick book from the bookshelf. The whole book was crimson red, which was actually woven from thousands of red pine needles. There were no words on the cover of the book. Xiao Baiya picked up the pen, pondered for a long time, and then wrote 2 words on it. Wang Lu. Wang Lu. The woman was surprised. How could it be him? Didn't they say that Lu Li is a lily? Xiao Baiya coldly humphed. Do you really believe that kid Wang Lu's nonsense? Lily. How could he think of that? That Lu Li has long been in love with him, and he also treats Lu Li differently. But Xianying said he didn't see a real love line between the two of them. Humph, what can he see with that insignificant skill of his? However, the two of them have not officially established a relationship. The love line between them can only be regarded as a potential line, which is very difficult to observe. At the same time, even if it is destroyed, the karmic backlash would be very small. Of course, for the sake of insurance, I will not do it directly. As Xiao Baiya spoke, he slowly and painstakingly wrote down the marriage chart. Destroying marriage is an absolute taboo for the cultivators of reaching Firmament Palace. If it is not necessary, this kind of spell should not be easily used. However, the cultivators of reaching Firmament Palace have been studying the way of marriage for thousands of years, so if they want to do something, they will always have the means. While speaking, Xiao Baiya's arm began to tremble slightly and beads of sweat oozed from his forehead. For a supreme-level cultivator, this kind of magical power consumption was already earth-shattering. And what kind of effect would such a terrifying force have on a mere king pill cultivator? What are you doing? To deal with a king pill level junior, you even used your true yuan. Do you want him to be alone for a lifetime? Xiao Baiya finally finished writing the last word, immediately closed the marriage chart, and then smiled tiredly at his wife. On the contrary, the chapter 1 just wrote is called, Xiao Luo Field. At the same time, on Spirit Sword Mountain, Wang Wu looked at Feng Yin Daoist master in front of her with great surprise. What? A new immortal dreamland has appeared in the group of immortal tombs? Only beauties below King Pill stage can enter? So you want me to take Yao, Air, Shixian, Xinyao, and that stupid cat to Plentiful City? Huh? Even little Ling Air? She's not. Well, I have no opinion. As long as your budget is generous, it doesn't matter how many people there are, ahaha. Chapter 546. There are so many people here. Is there any new activity in Plentiful City recently? Walking on the streets of Plentiful City, Wang Lu saw pedestrians rubbing shoulders with one another. The streets and alleys were surging with people. Moreover, most of the people were female cultivators from various sects, which made Plentiful City look like a country of women. The last time he saw such a surging crowd was shortly after the opening ceremony of the group of immortal tombs. At that time, the committee invited the most famous girl idol group in 9 regions to perform at a high price. The starchasers who heard the news almost flattened Plentiful City. At that time, the cultivators who were on duty for public security were so busy that their resentment soared to the sky. In the end, the committee gave them 10 times the reward to suppress it, which left a deep impression on Wang Lu. At this time, the scene reappeared, but the gender was reversed. Wang Lu immediately became curious. So many young women have gathered here, could it be that the mysterious Sky Mansion has recently promoted a young idol group? TSK, the mysterious Sky Mansion has finally figured it out. There's nothing better to earn money than women in this world. I've already suggested it to them, but no one took it seriously. Speaking of which, Luli, haven't you been doing experiential learning in Plentiful City recently? Have you heard about these things? Luli shook her head. I haven't heard of any idol group. The girl bought a few bags of fried fruit on the street and muttered, there are so many people in Plentiful City now because some time ago, several big sects have jointly broken through a big ring of immortal dreamlands, which opened a new batch of immortal dreamlands in the group of immortal tombs. It is said that the income is very rich. Oh. A batch? So it's a group of immortal dreams? The strategy group could actually make such progress? Unexpectedly, that group of people is quite capable. But what kind of group of immortal dreams could it have such a big attraction? Moreover, why are they all women? With the deepening of the development of the group of immortal tombs by the Wuxia League, more and more rules have been explored, and the understanding of the rules of the group of immortal tombs and immortal dreamlands has been different from the past. In the beginning, when the group of immortal tombs created different immortal dreamlands, they were highly independent and did not interfere with each other. Thousands of immortal dreamlands were independent and unrelated to each other. However, it didn't take long for a series of immortal dreamlands to appear. The content of the dreamlands became relatively fixed, and there was a relationship between them. Later on, there was even the concept of immortal dreams. That was not long after Wang Lu and the others fought for the 5 blood spirits crown. The exploration team discovered that after that battle, a large number of immortal dreamlands appeared in the group of immortal tombs. The content of the dreamland was highly solidified, and the randomness was greatly reduced. However, the income became more abundant. In an ordinary immortal dreamland, even an elite cultivator would often only have a small gain. Spiritual treasure level treasures were almost legendary. Wang Lu's devil jade was something that could only be found by chance. But in this fixed immortal dreamland, spiritual treasures and other items were not uncommon. Of course, based on the principle of equivalent exchange, spiritual treasures were not so easy to obtain. Moreover, these treasures were not renewable resources. Once someone took a treasure from an immortal dream, that immortal dream would be permanently closed. At that time, after the 5 blood spirits crown, the group of immortal dreams was repeatedly attacked by the exploration team day and night. In only 3 or 4 months, it was completely developed. The 5 uniques of the Wuxia League and several other top-ranked sects almost divided up all the benefits. Later, they found out that the immortal dreamland was permanently closed, and the resentment of those small and medium-sized sects was almost substantial. Therefore, since then, the management committee was forced to hold an emergency meeting to formulate a management method for the development of the group of immortal dreams and rationally allocate resources. Unfortunately, after that, there was no new group of immortal dreams for a long time. After all, the collision between the lead disciples of the 5 uniques of the Wuxia League was not something that could be seen everywhere. Wang Lu initially thought that there would not be a new group of immortal dreams for 3 to 5 years. Unexpectedly, the exploration team was more capable than expected. I don't know about the group of immortal dreams. Lu Li said, Master said that I should not be distracted in the immortal dreamland. I just need to do my own cultivation step by step. Wang Lu said with a smile, Uncle Zhou Ming is an experienced and prudent person, but I don't think we need to be so conservative. Huh? It's nothing, let's go first. In Wang Lu's mind, if 9 regions could continue to be peaceful for generations, then of course it was good to be a bit more experienced and prudent. Lu Li was now in the last stage of cultivating the core before achieving the king pill. Her every move would affect the quality of the king pill in the future, and even the success or failure of the king pill. The brilliant sword heart that she cultivated was a method that was inclined to erupt. During the period of cultivating the core, a little bit of carelessness could lead to the eruption of the core, and everything would fall short of success. Zhou Ming and the others had experienced a great calamity, so they were particularly sensitive to the fall of geniuses. Therefore, it was certainly good to seek stability. And from Wang Lu's point of view, he didn't want a girl with a temperament like Lu Li to experience any ups and downs. This kind of pure and dirty state of mind was like a work of art. However, the reality was, in the turbulent years, the most damaged thing was the so-called works of art. Wang Lu didn't know when the crisis of the fallen immortal would fully break out, but he thought that his generation should be able to see it, so. Lu Li, are you interested in the immortal dreamland? Lu Li thought for a moment. I don't know, I've never thought about it. Wang Lu said with a smile, the last time I went to the immortal dreamland, the background was set in the demon world continent. The food culture of the demon race is really interesting. Take the barbarians of Flaming Valley as an example. Although their civilization is backward, and their cooking methods are very open, seemingly rough, but the special environment produces special ingredients, which is unique. For example, there's a lava fruit, which has a unique taste. It has the freshness and sweetness of a fruit, but when it enters the mouth, it's like a volcanic eruption, and the taste bursts out in an instant. Senior brother, don't think of me as a fool who only knows how to eat. Lu Li protested unhappily, and then swallowed her saliva. That lava fruit, Wang Lu shrugged. When it leaves the environment of Flaming Valley, it will go bad, so it's useless to put it in the mustard seed bag. At that time, I didn't have a special storage item, so I had to give it up. What a pity. Lu Li's eyes were lost in thought, apparently already fantasizing about the taste of the lava fruit. Actually, it's not just the lava fruit. There are all kinds of stages in the immortal dreamland, so what rare delicacies can't be seen there? Yes, unfortunately, Master said. Wang Lu said, when did Uncle Zhou Ming tell you that? Lu Li replied, more than 3 months ago, when I first entered the Dan cultivating stage, Master told me. But now 3 months have passed. The time has changed, so the effect of the words would also change, right? Lu Li was stunned. Is that so? That's right. For example, after breakfast, you say that you're full, but what about at noon? Are you going to say that I'm hungry? Lu Li nodded. Yes. That's why Uncle Zhou Ming told you not to enter the immortal dreamland 3 months ago, but now it's not necessarily effective. If it's necessary, it's only natural for you to enter the immortal dreamland for experiential learning. But Lu Li still seemed hesitant. Wang Lu then continued, as the old saying goes, an elder brother is like a father. Now that your master is not here, I, as your senior brother, am the same as your master. Lu Li froze for a moment and then reluctantly nodded. Then I'll go to the immortal dreamland to have a look. Let's start with something simple. Moreover, I'll be accompanying you. Hee. Hearing that Wang Lu would accompany her, Lu Li no longer had any doubts. After entering the entrance of the group of immortal tombs with Lu Li, Wang Lu was taken aback by the sudden bright scene in front of him. In his line of sight, it was no longer the initial bright galaxy, but an incomparably wide square. There were many doors around the square, and each of the doors had a building. Many cultivators were walking in and out of the building, looking very busy. After a few months of absence, the group of immortal tombs had changed a lot. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as changing with each passing day. He still remembered that at the beginning, the outside of Plentiful City was full of flowers, but the inside was like a piece of barren land. During this period of time, the cultivators finally penetrated their own power into the group of immortal tombs. The square behind the door was not the arrangement of Dixian, but the deciphering and transformation of the group of immortal tombs by the Plentiful City Management Committee. People classified the entrance to the immortal dreamland, which could, to a certain extent, realize the artificial selection of the content of the immortal dreamland. Although the artificial selection would make the theoretical income lower than that of completely random, in fact, because the content of the immortal dreamland was controllable, the income would increase. Therefore, most of the cultivators who entered the group of immortal tombs would artificially choose the content of the immortal dreamland. He saw a long line in front of a door in the square. Most of the cultivators who came from the entrance of the group of immortal tombs were lined up behind this line. Obviously, this was the entrance to the group of immortal dreams that caused the crowd in Plentiful City. Thinking of the report that he received as a member of the management committee about the record of the group of immortal dreams, Wang Lu could not help but be moved. Right now, he was anxious to have a breakthrough in his cultivation base, so the group of immortal dreams was the best choice. In the last group of immortal dreams, even the immortal treasure appeared out of nowhere. Unfortunately, the exploration team failed to get it even after a lot of hard work. However, if it were him, it would be difficult to obtain the treasure of Swan Xian, but at least it was better than the random immortal dreamland. At the very least, a great killing weapon like the 5 blood spirits crown would never be seen in a random solo match. Thinking of this, Wang Lu pulled Luli and went straight to the door of the group of immortal dreams. As for the long line in front of the door, he completely turned a blind eye to it. As a member of the management committee and the discoverer of the group of immortal tombs, he had countless privileges here, so the VIP passage was just a small matter. Seeing this, the cultivators in the queue gnashed their teeth, but they could do nothing about it. However, when he and Luli flew to the door, they were stopped by a middle-aged clerk with King Pill cultivation base. "Excuse me, please wait a moment." Upon hearing this, Wang Lu stopped. "What? Do I also need to line up? You must be joking. You're going through the VIP passage, so of course, you don't need to line up. However, this group of immortal dreams can only be entered by women. The people around you can enter, but you can't. Only women can enter? What's the reason?" The clerk said with a wry smile, "This is not our intention to make things difficult, but the rules of the group of immortal dreams are like this. Even if a man tries to barge in, he would only be blocked by a powerful array. Some time ago, the management committee tried to crack the rules, but even the Supreme couldn't do anything about it. Instead, he was injured by the backlash. As for now, do you see any male cultivators in the queue behind you? Even if there are, they're only here to send their female companions, they can't go in themselves." Wang Lu looked back and sure enough, that was the case. No wonder Plentiful City has almost become a country of women these days. It turns out to be like this. The clerk said, "That's right, the income of this group of immortal dreams is very enviable. Unfortunately, it's not fated with the male cultivators in the world." Encountering such an unforeseen event at the last moment, Wang Lu, of course, was unwilling. He thought about it and asked, "How does this group of immortal tombs judge the difference between men and women? Physical or psychological?" Upon hearing this, the clerk was startled. "You're not thinking of," Wang Lu said with a smile, "I'm just asking. This, to be honest with you, there are many people who have the same idea. Relatively speaking, the standard of the group of immortal tombs is very strict. It must be a standard female. Let alone a man with a woman's body, even a woman who is not good-looking can't go in. There's such a rule. Yes, this group of immortal dreams is indeed strange. Look behind you, isn't the average quality very high? Wang Lu looked back. There are many exceptions. The clerk wryly smiled. Therefore, a large part of our daily work is to persuade them to accept the reality after they are turned away. I see. Thinking to this, Wang Lu was helpless. After sending off the clerk, he turned around and asked Luli, do you think? He saw Luli very generously nodded. No problem, I can do it alone. Senior brother, rest assured. Wang Lu was suddenly speechless. Originally, he wanted to ask, do you think we should change the place? However, it was rare for Luli to be so enthusiastic, so Wang Lu didn't want to dispel her interest in the immortal dreamland. Therefore, he said, very well, you can do it. Remember to be careful, don't try to be brave. I'll remember. With that, Luli strode away. Wang Lu looked at her back, but he couldn't put his mind at ease. Seeing that her back was about to disappear into the darkness, Wang Lu suddenly remembered that there were a lot of props in his mustard seed bag that he could use. Thus, he stepped forward and prepared to give them to her. Be careful, don't go any further. At this time, the clerk's voice came from behind him. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was stunned. Just as he was about to step back, it was already too late. He felt a strong suction coming from the front, and he was involuntarily sucked in. A black hole opened in front of him, and a huge whirlpool began to spin wildly. Behind him, the clerk was dumbfounded. He went in. How is this possible? Beside him, several male cultivators who came to send their companions were also surprised. Didn't they say that male cultivators can't go in? Did the rule change? Strange, I want to try it too. Then, they heard a burst of sound at the door, and several male cultivators flew out, their bodies scorched black. The clerk was even more shocked. The rule hasn't changed, so how did that person go in just now? While thinking about it, he suddenly thought of an incredible possibility. Could it be that the original body of that handsome young man is actually... That's right, if he changed into a woman's dress and did a bit of maintenance, his appearance is actually not bad. However, he remembered that that person was still young and already had a resounding reputation in 9 regions, and his future was limitless. Thus, it was better to keep this secret with him for a lifetime. In the end, the clerk could only sigh with emotion. 9 regions was really big, and there were really all kinds of strange things. At the same time, at the entrance of the group of immortal tombs, several women came together. One of them was full of the smell of alcohol, and she was in high spirits, talking incessantly. Little Ling Air, what do you think of the method I just said? Let that kid Wang Lu use his authority to open a hotel here. With the flow of people here, the business will definitely be booming. Moreover, if you meet a fat sheep, an evil cultivator who doesn't know what's good for him, just knock him out, drag him into the kitchen, plunder his money and treasures, and refine his body and primordial spirit into a magical treasure. Another windfall. Ha ha ha. Chapter 547. When the whirlpool in front of him disappeared, Wang Lu found himself lying next to a clear stream. Not far from him, Luli was happily fishing. Seeing that he had woken up, she flaunted a fish with a branch and shouted, Senior brother, look, I caught a jellyfish. He saw that the fish on the branch was crystal clear and soft, which was indeed similar to jelly. And from the teeth marks on it, Luli could not wait to taste it. Hee, Senior brother is right, the immortal dreamland is really powerful, there are everything. Senior brother, look at the fruit on that tree, doesn't it look like a piece of meat? Wang Lu looked up and sure enough, on a tree, he saw a sausage-like fruit. He couldn't help but inwardly spit, thinking that the structure of this group of immortal dreams was too uncreative. It was nothing more than a plant and animal exchange, which could only fool a little kid like Luli. However, now was not the time to care about plants and animals. The first question to be solved was, what was this place? Or rather, what kind of immortal dreamland was this? The content of the immortal dreamland was strange. Some emphasized fighting, some forcefully solved mysteries, and some emphasized interpersonal relationship. It was said that some time ago, even food, planting, and other sideline immortal dreamland had been discovered, which made the content of the immortal dreamland even richer. Based on Wang Lu's current needs, what he needed the most was a combat-type immortal dreamland. Because compared to any high-level method or magical treasure, what he needed more was to hone himself in actual combat. And it stood to reason that after entering the entrance of the group of immortal dreams, there should be a choice link for him to choose which type of immortal dreamland he wanted to enter. As a result, he didn't know which program had a problem, but that link was skipped, and in the blink of an eye, he came to this strange place. If this immortal dreamland was biased towards the plot, then it would be of little value to Wang Lu. Instead of wasting time here, he might as well give up. Secondly, there was a question: why did he come to this place? If he remembered correctly, the clerk at the door repeatedly emphasized that only female cultivators could enter, and they must be beautiful female cultivators. Wang Lu didn't think that the clerk was deliberately deceiving him. Lu being able to come in was a matter of course, but what about him? Wang Lu really did not feel that he was a woman. Even if he had a dark history in the ancient sword tomb, if that counted, then the rule that only allowed women to enter would be meaningless. A large number of male cultivators could use similar tricks to sneak in. Speaking of beauty, although he wasn't the rough and bold type, his face and body showed obvious male characteristics. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't fit the definition of a beauty, right? So what was the problem? The demonic jade in his pocket? The problem was, although the magical effect of the demon jade was extraordinary, in essence, it was only the most precious treasure of the demon world that was produced in the 5-blood spirit crown instance, so it was impossible for it to affect the entire group of immortal tombs. Or could it be that as the discoverer of the group of immortal tombs, he had an unknown privilege? No, if he really had special privileges, he wouldn't have had to work so hard to clear the 36 chains. There must be some other reason. Senior brother, where are we going next? While Wang Lu was racking his brains, Lu Li had already finished eating the jellyfish and the preserved meat fruit. With a face full of longing, she asked Wang Lu where to go next. Yes, it's meaningless to meditate here. It's better to walk around and see what this immortal dreamland looks like. The two of them summoned their flying swords and flew straight to the sky. After crossing the vast and dense mountain forest, they saw human settlements in a place surrounded by mountains. It was a bustling and comfortable small town. From a distance, they used their primordial spirit to perceive that there was no particularly powerful individual in the town. Most of them were just mortal creatures. A few of them had a certain cultivation base and magical ability, but at most, they were around the level of King Pill. Such a town was the most suitable starting point for the whole instance, the novice village. Let's go down. Hey, wait a minute. Before the flying sword descended, Wang Lu suddenly remembered something and quickly stopped. In theory, this immortal dreamland should be a country of women. The appearance of Wang Lu was absolutely unexpected. Rashly appearing might cause unnecessary trouble. Even if the people here were simple and had no evil intention, it was not fun to be stared at like a rare creature. Therefore, before landing, Wang Lu deliberately used the 5-element spell to cast an illusion effect on himself, turning himself into a woman. As for the specific image, Wang Lu was too lazy to think about the design, so he directly used his master's image. Although she lacked moral integrity, her face and figure were still good. She was completely different from the ugly duckling girl 150 years ago, a world of difference. Thus, Wang Lu and Lu Li, like a pair of cultivator sisters, descended from the sky into the city. Seeing the appearance of the two people, the people in the city showed just the right amount of surprise. Many curious eyes were cast on them, but there was no fanaticism nor panic. It seemed that in this immortal dreamland, flying on a flying sword was not a rare thing at all. At the same time, Wang Lu also looked at the people around him. As expected, this was really a country of women. The small city was full of women. Moreover, without exception, they were all beautiful women. Most of them seemed to be in their 20s or 30s, which was the golden age of women. Old ones were very rare. Most of these people were just ordinary people, without any immortal cultivation base or any other natural magical ability. However, these people's essence, chi, and spirit were full and exuberant, far better than the mortals in 9 regions. Any one of them could be considered as a 1 in 100 martial arts genius in 9 regions. Moreover, their innate vitality was unusually exuberant, which seemed to explain why the people in the city looked so young. What an interesting immortal dream. Wang Lu muttered to himself and then took Lu Li's hand. Come on, let's go taste the special food here. Oh. Lu Li was elated. Although there were many differences between this small city called Gorgeous Town and the cities in 9 regions, as long as it was a city for people to live in, there would always be similarities. Not long after the two of them walked along the main road in the middle of the small city, they saw a thriving restaurant. The fragrance of the food drifted from afar, which made Lu Li continue to silently swallow. Together with Lu Li, they found a place to sit in the restaurant. After confirming that they could directly pay with gold and silver, they asked the waiter to bring a table full of delicious food. While eating with Lu Li, Wang Lu carefully listened to the people around them. People always talked more at the table than usual. Therefore, conversely, there was no place better to get information than at the table. With Wang Lu's hearing, he could hear the conversation of every table on the 4th floor of the restaurant. In the time it took to eat a meal, Wang Lu had heard enough of the gossip and had a preliminary judgment about the background of this immortal dream. First of all, as he had guessed before, this was definitely a country of women. Because after listening for so long, Wang Lu had never heard anyone mention the word man, as if the concept of man didn't exist in the dictionary of the people in this place. Secondly, this world, or at least, the residents of this gorgeous town were very gentle and kind. There were hundreds of diners on the 4th floor of the restaurant, but there was no quarrel during the meal, which reminded Wang Lu of the new demon world. Thirdly, the people here were not much different from the people in 9 regions. They all had 7 emotions and 6 desires, as well as tea, rice, oil, and salt. Finally, this world was not completely peaceful and prosperous. There were still wars and disputes, and they were not rare. After knowing this, Wang Lu felt relieved. At least, he didn't have to worry about not getting any harvest in this immortal dream. However, the few questions that Wang Lu was most concerned about had not been answered. For example, the simplest question, if there were only women in this world, how could they reproduce? Did they have mitosis? Cloning technology? Wang Lu listened for a long time, but he didn't hear people mention the topic of heirs and inheritance. Secondly, what did this world need him to do? When each immortal dream land was born, there would be an obvious or implicit main plot, or the main contradiction, which ran through the whole immortal dream land's experiential learning. To put it simply, when the cultivators entered the immortal dream land, they would soon trigger an event, and then they would embark on a ups and downs adventure. Because the immortal dream land was, after all, designed by the Dixian people to let the later generations of cultivators practice their experiential learning, not to experience life. However, so far, Wang Lu hasn't been able to find the main plot. In that case, let's go to the temple on the east side of the city. After settling the bill, Wang Lu said to Lu Li, "Temple?" Lu Li curiously asked. "Yes, the temple." Just now, he heard people mention that there was a temple of heaven in the east side of the city, where the entire gorgeous town was enshrined, or the belief of the people in this world, heaven. The Temple of Heaven was a huge religious organization that spread all over the world. And Wang Lu was quite interested in this. A religion with influence all over the world often recorded many truths of the world. Because most of the religions actually developed around such questions: who am I, where do I come from, and where do I go? For example, the God that we believe in created you, you are the people of God, created by God, and in the future, you will return to the kingdom of God, and so on. Of course, these metaphysical theories were irrelevant, but the important thing was that when religions tried to prove those theories, they would often record history, which was what Wang Lu was eager to understand. Soon after, Wang Lu and Lu Li came to the east side of the city and saw the Temple of Heaven. The temple was simple and unadorned, but in front of the door, there were people coming and going, and the incense was extremely prosperous. At the same time, there was a powerful aura hidden in the temple. The only King Pill-level powerhouse in Gorgeous Town was here. In order to avoid trouble and act in a low-key manner, after entering the temple, Wang Lu imitated other people and bought an ancient book that recorded the religious doctrine, Heaven News, and then quietly left. After buying the book, Wang Lu quickly flipped through the book and found a lot of important information. According to Heaven News, in the earliest days, the world was in a state of ignorance and chaos. At that time, there were also mountains and rivers, birds and beasts, but the living conditions of the creatures were extremely bad, struggling in pain and torture. Then, the heaven took pity on all living beings and gathered the essence of the earth in one place, which then floated up from the chaos, stood out, and formed the present world. At that time, those who were selected by the heaven to enter this gathering place were the ancestors of this world. Without exception, they were all women. These women, regardless of their figure, appearance, or aptitude, were all at the top level in the chaotic era. Compared with mortals, they were no different from immortals. Therefore, they were called human immortals, and this world that floated in the sky was called Heavenly Earth. Chapter 548. In addition to the origin of Heavenly Earth, Heaven News also answered the earliest question raised by Wang Lu. This world is made up of women, so how do they reproduce? The answer was, it was bestowed by heaven. In the teachings of the Temple of Heaven, it was stated and stipulated that when two women fell in love with each other and decided to stay together for a lifetime, they would go to the Temple of Heaven to worship heaven, and then communicate with heaven through a special ceremony. If their feelings were recognized by heaven, then they would be given a new life. Seeing this, Wang Lu could not help but sigh with emotion that the heaven of Heavenly Earth was really busy. Even the matter of mating had to be taken care of. But this was undoubtedly a good move. Holding the reproductive rights of Heavenly Earth, of course, it could become a unique belief here. However, interestingly, the heaven here was not a personified existence. Even the totem worshipped in the Temple of Heaven was not a personified idol. Wang Lu's initial guess that the so-called heaven was a personified existence, but now it seemed that it was not necessarily correct. Then, Heaven News also elaborated in detail on the question of where would people go. According to Heaven News, if the human medium immortals of Heavenly Earth achieved success in their cultivation, they could ascend to the immortal world and enjoy eternal freedom. If their qualifications were ordinary, then after a lifetime, their soul would be recovered by the heaven and reincarnated into a new life. If they committed many evils, then after death, they would be thrown into the chaotic world. This view of afterlife was quite similar to that of Zen Buddhism. At the same time, Heavenly Earth was a paradise sublimated from the chaotic world, but it did not mean that human medium immortals could sit back and relax. After all, human medium immortals were just human medium immortals, and Heavenly Earth was still human medium immortals. Compared with the immortal world that was rumored to be immortal and eternal, this place was still very immature. And more importantly, the chaotic world still existed, right under the feet of Heavenly Earth, and it was always eyeing the paradise above their heads. In history, the chaotic world had launched dozens of wars of aggression against Heavenly Earth. Although they were repelled every time, if Heavenly Earth was not well prepared, it would suffer huge losses. In Wang Lu's view, this setting was a more intense stimulus measure, so that those later human medium immortals would not lie in the shadow of their ancestors and stop moving forward. After all, although the temptation of becoming an immortal was great, it was not realistic for most of the human immortals. Wouldn't it be better to live a carefree life in the paradise of Heavenly Earth? However, the threat of the primal chaos realm made him give up on this idea. At the same time, in Wang Lu's view, this should also be the main plot of this immortal dream. The chaotic creatures from the lower realm invaded, and then the cultivators who entered the immortal dream, as members of the heavenly earth, fought against the invaders bravely. After making great contributions, they returned to the 9 regions with treasures. However, as he continued to read Heaven News, Wang Lu found that in addition to the main plot, there was likely to be a huge subplot, the Temple of Heaven. In the Heavenly News, there were almost no detailed records about the creatures of the lower realm, and the dozens of wars of invasion were also somewhat vague. Regarding the dozens of wars against the invasion, the Heavenly News only recorded that the Temple of Heaven played a central role in the war, repeatedly guiding the human middle immortals to protect their homeland. However, the detailed process was stingy, and it always emphasized, intentionally or unintentionally, that when the chaotic creatures invaded, the Temple of Heaven would give the necessary shelter to the heavenly earth. However, as for how to define the concept of necessary, it was a very vague concept. It could be assumed that it was closely related to people's devotion to the Temple of Heaven. It seems that this Temple of Heaven is simply the hegemon of the heavenly earth. After reading the complete Heaven News, Wang Lu could not help but frown. There was no need to say much about the strength of the Temple of Heaven. The most powerful person in the entire city was the King Pill of the Temple of Heaven. The rest were nothing, simply a crane in a flock of chickens. Of course, strength was not the problem. The problem was how the Temple of Heaven used this strength. Judging from the tendency of the Heaven News, the Temple of Heaven seemed to have no intention to let other people participate in the war. According to the intentional or unintentional guidance of the Heaven News, it seemed that when the chaotic creatures invaded, other people only needed to burn incense and worship the heaven in the temple, and everything else could be handed over to the monks of the temple. But wasn't this tantamount to guiding others to destroy their own martial arts? It was not a good thing to pin all hope on the temple and completely lose their own will to struggle. Moreover, this was also inconsistent with the original intention of the heaven. The sublimation of the heavenly earth and the chaotic creatures of the lower realm was to give the human immortals and their descendants enough intensity. Now that the Temple of Heaven had taken over everything, where was the incentive? Of course, this kind of thing was not uncommon in 9 regions. Whether it was a religious organization or a political organization, later on, they were often the first to abandon their own beliefs. The Temple of Heaven had been developing in the heavenly earth for thousands of years, so it was not surprising that there would be such a change. And if one wanted to dig deeper, this would be another big plot line. After Wang Lu figured out the Temple of Heaven from the darkest angle, he finally had a preliminary outline of this immortal dreamland in his mind. A big main line and a big side line, which was the focus of this time. Wang Lu considered for a while and decided to use the main line as the core to carry out the strategy. After all, compared with the side line of resisting the evil rule of the Temple of Heaven, it was more interesting to detonate the war between the 2 worlds. Especially the plot of leading a group of beautiful girls to bravely resist the invasion of the chaotic tentacles. Of course, one of the problems in the main plot was that he, a man, should not appear in this country of women. Once his male identity was discovered, it was likely that he would be regarded as a strange chaotic creature from the lower realm. At that time, he would face the dilemma of being attacked from both front and back by his teammates. And how could it be easy to hide his identity? Wang Lu's self-proclaimed mastery in illusion was not excellent. It was fine to fool an ordinary king pill, but if he met a yuanying stage expert, he would definitely be seen through at a glance. And once the war between the 2 worlds broke out, let alone yuanying stage, even a Taoist master of deity stage would not be new. However, on second thought, there was also an opportunity hidden behind the crisis. Right now, he was the only man in the heavenly earth. According to the law of scarcity, he was even rarer than a supreme-level powerhouse. This was clearly a unique advantage. Hey, is this the real meaning of the existence of this immortal dreamland? The war between the 2 worlds, the Temple of Heaven, are all just pretenses. The hidden plot of this level is the key. I will use my super weapon to let these women who have never seen a man and can only grind tofu every day taste the real taste of meat. From now on, they will become my exclusive meat slaves. No, that would be too vulgar. I should explain it from another perspective. The point of this level is to use my enthusiasm to correctly guide the values of these women and promote the restoration of yin and yang harmony in this heavenly earth. TSK, this is a full sense of mission. Chapter 549. In the evening, Wang Lu received a letter in Gorgeous Town Inn. It was a letter from a 7-colored spirit bird whose wings were surrounded by spirit wind. Oh. What is this? Wang Lu curiously opened the letter while looking at the bird that was standing on the window lattice and constantly combing its feathers. The bird's posture was very arrogant, and it raised its head high, seemingly looking down on everyone. After opening the letter, Wang Lu found that the letter was actually sent by the host of the Temple of Heaven in Gorgeous Town. The letter was not long. The gist of it was that the arrival of the distinguished guests was not timely greeted, which was a lack of etiquette. In the evening, a banquet was set up in the Temple of Heaven to respectfully await your arrival. Of course, according to Wang Lu's understanding, the translation of this letter was, "To outsiders, please report to me here." The Temple of Heaven was indeed worthy to be the hegemon of the heavenly earth. Although in theory, it was only a religious organization that served the heaven, in fact, the tentacles of its power had already spread everywhere and were deeply rooted. Now, even the appearance of 2 strange cultivators in Gorgeous Town would attract its attention. Its scope of management was really broad. However, this was not surprising. During the day, Wang Lu and Lu Li ostentatiously ran to the Temple of Heaven to visit and even took back a few heaven news. During this period, they did not deliberately hide their tracks. And if the Temple of Heaven could not even find this kind of foreign cultivator who walked into its own house, it would not be qualified to dominate the heavenly earth. It was just that, Wang Lu did not expect the other party to be so straightforward. In the evening, the invitation letter was delivered to his door. So, should he keep the appointment or not? When he was thinking about it, he saw that the 7-colored spirit bird was impatiently knocking on the window lattice with its claws, making a gurgling sound, as if it was urging him. Wang Lu impatiently waved his hand. "I have received the letter, you can go now." The spirit bird suddenly widened its eyes and incredulously stared at Wang Lu, as if it was a young girl who had been molested by a perverted man. "Hey, what are you looking at me for? Do you want me to pay for the postage?" TSK, the dignified Temple of Heaven is too tasteless, sending a letter and paying for it. As Wang Lu spoke, he picked up a peanut from the plate on the table and threw it over. "Hey, eat it." The bird angrily flapped its wings and swept the peanuts aside. It then let out an excited cry that was crisp and pleasant to the ear. "Tisk, it's just a stupid bird, yet it's so particular." Wang Lu threw a spirit stone instead. The bird stuck its head out and caught it with its beak. Then, it spread its wings and flew away. However, before it left, it flapped its wings and tail wildly, blowing a large amount of dust and fallen leaves into the room. After sending away the proud messenger bird, Wang Lu turned his head and saw Lu Li curiously watching the departing back of the bird, seemingly reluctant to part. He couldn't help but laugh. "Ha ha ha, I forgot to ask you if you like to eat roasted bird." Lu Li was slightly resentful. "Senior brother, what do you think I am?" Then, he carefully swallowed. That night, Wang Lu and Lu Li appeared on time in front of the Temple of Heaven. After thinking about it, Wang Lu felt that it was more interesting to keep the appointment. First, the wording of the other party's letter was respectful and polite, and it seemed that there was no evil intention. If he rudely refused, it would appear that he had a guilty conscience. Second, an opportunity to talk directly with the middle-level personnel of the Temple of Heaven was very necessary at this stage. After all, most of the information obtained through reading the heaven news was speculation, and many specific matters could not even be guessed. However, if he could talk directly with the monks of the Temple of Heaven, he had the opportunity to get more information. At night, the Temple of Heaven was no longer open to the public, and the door was closed. When Wang Lu arrived at the entrance of the Temple of Heaven, a plain-dressed girl quietly opened the door, welcomed the two of them in, and led them all the way to the inner hall of the Temple of Heaven. The banquet in the inner hall had been prepared. There was only one person at the banquet, a beautiful woman who looked to be in her 30s. From the characteristics of her dress, it could be seen that she was Li Yan, the person in charge of the Temple of Heaven in Gorgeous Town. The woman was dressed in a gorgeous and beautiful dress, which meant that she was ranked 5th among the 9 layers of heaven in the Temple of Heaven, and belonged to the backbone of the Temple of Heaven system. The phoenix hairpin on her head was inlaid with a blue stone, which symbolized the status of the leader. After a simple greeting, Wang Lu and Lu Li took their respective seats. Then, Wang Lu and Li Yan each put on a polite mask and chatted for a while, and then the tone of the banquet was set. Sure enough, as expected, this was a simple and ordinary meal to deepen each other's feelings. After all, no matter how overbearing the Temple of Heaven was, it would not go so far as to arrogantly offend all the cultivators in the world for no reason. Li Yan invited the two of them to come, but it was more for friendly exchange and to sit down and discuss. Since the tone of the banquet was set for friendly exchange, after a round of toasting, the topic quickly warmed up. Li Yan inadvertently asked about the origin of the two, and Wang Lu said that it was a hermit cultivator inheritance in the mountain. In any case, with how big the heavenly earth was, even the Temple of Heaven could not control the overall situation. At least, it was recorded in the heavenly news that when the lower realm invaded, many hermit cultivators in the heavenly earth generously came out to help. And Li Yan also did not delve into the hermit cultivator's origin. After skipping over the identity issue, the three of them began to discuss the issue of immortal cultivation. Wang Lu and Lu Li came from famous sects, while Li Yan was backed by the Temple of Heaven. Both of them were knowledgeable and had a deep foundation. The two sides' immortal cultivation systems were very different, but there was no lack of commonalities. For a time, the discussion was very heated, and both sides felt that they had benefited a lot. Taking advantage of the heated topic, Wang Lu simply extended the topic and raised a question that he was very concerned about. Fellow Taoist Li Yan, I have observed the operation of all things in this world, and all of them contain the supreme path, but there is one thing that I can't understand. Fellow Taoist, please go ahead. I see that all the creatures in this world are divided into male and female, yin and yang, and yin and yang are in harmony to reproduce and live. For example, the animals, insects, and fish on our dinner plate are like this. But why are we human beings different? Has fellow Taoist ever thought that perhaps we human beings should also be like other creatures? Li Yan took a sip of tea, revealed a smile of understanding, and said, fellow Taoist's question seems ordinary, but it actually hits the nail on the head. Why are we human beings different? I believe more than one person has been curious about this question, and the answer is actually very simple. Because when the heaven created us, it made us the spirit of all things, the leader of all things. Therefore, we have a unique advantage that other creatures do not have. Ordinary creatures need to be divided into yin and yang, each having half to live and multiply endlessly, but we human beings can monopolize both sides of yin and yang. I think this is also one of the manifestations of human beings being superior to other creatures. As for what fellow Taoist said about being yin and yang, I believe it is just an illusion during cultivation. You see, the yin and yang in my body are in harmony, there is no imbalance. Of course, if we talk about the root attribute, I am indeed yin, but this is because we are only the descendants of human immortals, not immortals in the real sense, so there is still a little deficiency. When our cultivation realm is high enough, this deficiency will also disappear, and by then, we will become truly perfect creatures. Wang Lu almost knelt down. Li Yan was indeed worthy to be the backbone of the 9 layers of heaven of the Temple of Heaven. The face of this professional swindler was really amazing. A ridiculous theory could actually be said by her in such a convincing manner. Then has fellow Taoist ever considered that some organs in our body look very suspicious? Li Yan blinked her eyes and said, suspicious organs? Fellow Taoist is referring to. Wang Lu very simply and clearly pointed between her legs. Li Yan was somewhat confused and also somewhat amused. This is the source of our happiness. Hey, Is the joy of the Temple of Heaven actually this vulgar? Wang Lu had to patiently explain further, I mean a little deeper inside, the internal organs. Li Yan suddenly understood, you mean there? Indeed, I don't know what its use is. Apart from making those ordinary people who have never cultivated and can't control their qi and blood every month, it is meaningless. Wang Lu then asked, if our current state is already close to perfection, then don't you think it is unnecessary for that thing to exist? Creatures similar to human beings give birth to the next generation through there, but we don't need to do so. Instead, we are bestowed by the heaven to the next generation, then. Li Yan smiled and said, like I said, we human immortals are not real immortals, so it is excusable to leave some traces of imperfection on our body. In fact, in addition to the place you pointed out, there are still many useless things on our body, such as the cecum, isn't it? I think fellow Taoist is probably too obsessed with the so-called perfection. Speaking to this point, perhaps because she was already drunk, Li Yan simply said a few more words. Actually, I am very clear about what fellow Taoist wants to say. Over the years, there have been many people who have raised similar questions to you, including me. I have also thought that there should be a kind of human being in this world, similar to us but different, born masculine, But when I carefully read the ancient books of the Temple of Heaven, I gradually realized how stupid my question was. Perhaps in the chaotic era, we human beings were indeed divided into two kinds, yin and yang, but later the heavens sublimated the earth to become the heavenly earth, and our ancestors also stood out from ordinary human beings. Presumably, from that time on, we gradually changed. Wang Lu had nothing to say. For a swindler who attributed all problems to the heaven, it was a waste of time to say more. At this time, Li Yan also finished talking and began to get up to see the guest off. It was just before they parted, Li Yan sent Wang Lu a letter. Fellow Taoist is very knowledgeable, and many of your ideas are deeply inspiring. You have also answered a lot of problems that have troubled me for a long time. Unfortunately, I can't answer all your questions. But the Temple of Heaven is full of talented people. Above me, there are still open heaven, harmonious heaven, and so on. Presumably, they can answer your questions. However, fellow Taoist is not a member of the Temple of Heaven, so, take this letter. With it, you can go to the Palace of Heaven to pay a visit to Lady Moonless Harmonious Heaven, and let her answer your questions. Wang Lu put away the letter of recommendation, earnestly thanked her, and then was sent all the way to the door by Li Yan. Actually, you don't have to thank me. Today, my harvest is bigger than yours. Your understanding of immortal cultivation is an eye-opener. Come to think of it, I just received a few cultivators a few days ago. Many of their viewpoints are similar to yours. If you have the opportunity to meet them, perhaps you'll be able to get along well with them. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was surprised. Many of their views are similar to mine. At the banquet just now, some of the statements that Wang Lu said that really inspired Li Yan were basically the differences between the cultivation system of 9 regions and the cultivation system of this immortal dream. And if those people's views were similar to Wang Lu's, it was likely that in this immortal dreamland, in addition to Wang Lu and Lu Li, there were other people. Moreover, they had already visited Li Yan first. The question was, who could it be? Chapter 550. According to Li Yan, the several cultivators who visited the Temple of Heaven a few days ago had received several tasks from her. The Temple of Heaven often issued various reward tasks to the loose cultivators. At this time, they should be in Gorgeous Town. Wang Lu was very curious about what kind of sacred being would come before him. Before this, he had always thought that this immortal dream was closed, which meant that once a group of people entered, it would be closed to the outside world. Unexpectedly, it was actually open, similar to the 5 blood spirit crown competition. Wang Lu was not worried about a simple dungeon raid. His many years of martial arts achievements were enough to rely on. However, once there were outsiders involved, the problem would often become complicated. Wang Lu was not worried that he would be hindered by others. The problem was that when he raided the dungeon, although he often took an unconventional path, once he unsheathed his sword, it would be a straightforward crushing situation. Those who rashly stood in front of him were likely to be directly crushed. Wang Lu didn't want to inexplicably increase the sin of killing, so he wanted to make contact with those people before he made his move, so that they could have a tacit understanding with each other. In theory, it should not be difficult to reach a tacit understanding. Li Yan said that their cultivation base was not high, and they even took over the task of doing odd jobs. Presumably, in this dungeon raid, their goal was limited, which was different from his own. Thus, they should be able to live in harmony. According to some clues provided by Li Yan, Wang Lu soon found these several cultivators in a house in Gorgeous Town. However, when he and Lu Li landed in the courtyard with his flying sword and met those people face to face, he felt a deep sense of regret. Damn it, I was careless. I should have found out that these people's magical power fluctuations are somewhat familiar. Recently, I'm getting older and forgetful. And just as Wang Lu's expression began to distort, the several girls in the courtyard also saw him. The next moment, an astonishing scream resounded through the sky. Sister Wu. Ah, that's right, I am now blessed with an illusion technique, wearing the appearance of my master. And this familiar voice, this amazing enthusiasm. Wang Lu's thoughts instantly returned to the past, which made his reaction slightly slow for a moment. However, Wang Lu only hesitated for a moment before 4 fragrant winds whistled toward him. In the blink of an eye, he was surrounded by the 4 girls. Even Lu Li, who was previously holding his hand, was pushed to the side. There was a constant chatter in his ears, and every sound brought back memories of the past. Sister Wu, we've missed you so much. Lin Wan was the most enthusiastic of them all. Yes, we haven't seen each other for a long time. This was the eldest sister Tiandao Lan. You haven't contacted us for so long. You're heartless. Cherry said. Sob, we were abandoned by Big Sister Wu. From now on, we're 4 pairs of used shoes, sob. This. Yingtao had become bad after not seeing him for a while. Previously, Wang Lu had a chance encounter with the 4 sisters in the immortal dreamland of the group of immortal tombs. He took the 4 of them to pass through the instance and for the first time came into contact with the secret of time travel in the group of immortal tombs. After their separation, the 2 sides only occasionally exchanged letters. They thought that with the vastness of 9 regions, it would be very difficult for them to meet again. Unexpectedly, they met again here. While thinking about it, Wang Lu felt the 4 warm bodies very intimately sticking to him. The soft touch spread all over his body, and what was even more intense was the fiery enthusiasm from those 4 bodies. No, it was not just fiery, it was simply explosive. In order to compensate us, Sister Wu, let's do double cultivation now. We've just made the bed, a luxurious 5-spirit crystal stone bed that can accommodate up to 10 people. Yes, let's do double cultivation now. We really miss Sister Wu's telepathic finger. Come on, this time, we will definitely not faint so quickly. Rest assured, Sister Wu. At the same time, with such explosive speech, the 4 Yin and Yang schoolgirls moved very quickly. Tiandao Lan waved her hand to spread out a perception concealment spell that covered the courtyard. At the same time, together with the other 3, they began to take off their clothes. The Yin and Yang school's uniform was carefully designed, and it was also famous in the entire 9 regions Wanxian League. In addition to the most basic function of body protection, stabilizing flow, and other effects, the biggest feature was, no matter how gorgeous and exquisite it looked, when taking it off, it could be easily taken off as long as it was gently pulled by the mechanism. Therefore, in an instant, Wang Lu felt that the touch on his body was a bit different. At the same time, those 4 pairs of claws boldly reached out to him. Sister Wu, the last time we were together, you teased us, but this time, we want to take our revenge. That's right. You even told us that you have a little fresh meat disciple that we can manipulate, but he seems to be easy to talk to, and he's very strict in guarding his chastity. There's no flaw at all. Your compensation doesn't work at all. Yes, this time, we must take our revenge. This time, we also practice the telepathic finger, Sister Wu, you can enjoy it with ease. Seeing that the situation was about to enter an irreversible situation, Wang Lu roared, wait for me. At the same time, his non-phase sword chi propped up a layer of protection, pushing the 4 people away, barely maintaining the line of defense. Sister Wu, you're being shameless again. How could you use your non-phase sword defense at this time? Yes. Didn't we agree that we're only allowed to use dual cultivation to decide the outcome? If you want to protect yourself, you have to beat the opponent 1 step ahead. If you can make the 4 of us unconscious like last time, we'll be completely convinced. But this time, it's not that easy. We haven't seen each other for a few years, and we've been cultivating hard. So, come on, Sister Wu, let's decide the outcome again. Wang Lu felt that cold sweat was about to flow out. Decide the outcome your ass. Although he had never been afraid of any challenge since his debut, in this fight, he really had no choice but to be afraid. Especially when he saw the 4 girls had already stretched out their dexterous and slender fingers, Wang Lu felt a burst of pain in his balls. Is this the telepathic finger? Honorable Master, how much sin have you committed in those days? Wait a minute, I want to say, you've got the wrong person. Wang Lu said. Seeing that Tiandao Lan's concealing technique was not bad, he simply lifted his illusion. Look, it's me. Tiandao Lan and the other 3 girls were dumbfounded. It's you? Seeing that the 4 of them had stopped, Wang Lu was slightly relieved, nodded with a smile, and said, because of some special reasons, I'm wearing my master's face. But, I'm the real Wang Lu, not your Sister Wu with telepathic finger. Just now, you also felt my non-phase sword defense, which is very different from my master's. In order to avoid being regarded as Wang Wu's fake excuse, Wang Lu also added a few words of explanation. However, Tiandao Lan and the others simply didn't pay attention to it. It's Wang Lu. We missed you so much. I haven't seen you for a long time, but you're still as handsome. No, I can't help but want to dual cultivate with you. Wang Lu was inexplicably surprised. Hey, can you guys figure out who you are? I'm a serious person, I don't have any telepathic finger to serve you. Tiandao Lan said with a charming smile, you don't have it, but we do. Lin Wan was eager to give it a try. Moreover, who said you don't have it? Aren't you men born with telepathic finger? Hey, I'm not happy to be called a finger by you. And just at this time, suddenly, the youngest Li Qingxi asked in surprise, men. Aren't women the only ones who can come in here? Tiandao Lan and the others were also stunned. Yes, this is a women's immortal dream. Wang Lu, how did you come in? Ying Tao suddenly had an idea. Turns out Wang Lu, you're also a woman. Is your sister? Ha ha ha, that's even better. Since we're all women, let's be honest with each other. Aren't the trigger conditions for you to be honest with each other too broad? Is the only function of your exquisite dress to be taken off? If they have wisdom, they would definitely cry, right? We will carefully teach you telepathic finger. Damn it, it's just a mere telepathic finger, yet you still want to talk about it endlessly? Believe it or not, I'll use my big excavator to dig you until you cry for your parents. However, seeing that the several people of Yin and Yang school have entered a fanatical state, perhaps common sense wouldn't work. Thus, Wang Lu had to resort to his killer move. Luli, come here. Oh. Luli, who has been foolishly watching the show from the side, came closer. However, just as she arrived at Wang Lu's side, she was hugged by Wang Lu. I'm sorry, I have a girlfriend now. What? The 4 women exclaimed in unison, and then incredulously looked at the equally surprised Luli. She's your girlfriend? No, you actually have a girlfriend? Wang Lu was immediately unhappy. Don't tell me I have a boyfriend? As soon as his voice fell, he saw Ying Tao slightly tilted her head and said, I heard that you and Hai Yun fan of 10,000 Arts sect. What the hell, where did this gossip come from? It's Sister Wu who told us. She also said that she earned a lot of money by writing to Jinshi about the two of you. Your uncle's Wang Wu. In short. Wang Lu took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. I'm a normal and loyal man, I won't do anything that would let down my girlfriend. Lin Wan pursed her lips and somewhat discontentedly said, what's so good about her? Although her talent and cultivation base are indeed higher than us, and her face is also beautiful, she doesn't seem to understand the matters between men and women, so it's impossible for her to serve you well. Tian Daolan also said, yes, the most important thing for a woman is her inner charm. Oh, no, it's her inner charm. Lu Li curiously asked, Senior brother, what is inner charm? Wang Lu patted her head. Don't think too much, it's not something that your IQ should consider. Oh. Then, Wang Lu sighed and explained to Tian Daolan and the others, yes, with her temperament, even in 100 years, it's impossible for her skill to be on par with you, but, with that, he stretched out his finger and untied a button on Lu Li's chest. She has breasts. Chapter 551. When Lu Li's flawless deep ravine appeared in front of them, the girls of Yin and Yang school knew that they were defeated. In terms of size alone, Lu Li's chest didn't seem particularly exaggerated. In 9 regions, the value of D cup couldn't even be counted as 1 in 1,000, and it was even worse than those demons. However, as the saying goes, the amateurs watch the excitement, while the experts see the artistry. For the professionals of Yin and Yang school, the extraordinariness of Lu Li was clear at a glance. The aesthetic ability of cultivators was on a completely different level from that of ordinary people. Because most of the cultivators of foundation establishment stage could begin to transform their body. Even a 5-inch nail could transform into a 9 feet tall man, let alone a mere cosmetic breast augmentation. However, because the technology of transformation had become stronger, the corresponding aesthetic standard would also become harsher. In addition to paying more attention to details, in Shudan stage and King Pill stage and above, the beauty or ugliness of a cultivator was also measured by the degree of internal and external harmony. If there was no internal support, the simple transformation of the body was just an empty shell. And in this respect, Lu Li, who cultivated the brilliant sword heart, was almost unparalleled. Tian Daolan asked herself, even those senior sisters who specialized in beauty in Yin and Yang school had to at least reach Yuanying stage before they could reach Lu Li's current level. What Wang Lu used to show off was really an unparalleled weapon. Perhaps Lu Li's skill was as pure as a white paper, but her hard condition was too good. This was like, the most expensive fish-flavored shredded pork cooked by a famous chef could be sold for less than 100 taels of silver. However, a bear paw that had just been hunted from the deep mountain, even if it was raw, would be worth more than 100 taels of silver. The quality of Tian Daolan and the others was quite good. Unfortunately, they met Lu Li. Alas, I admit defeat. Tian Daolan put on her clothes with flagging interest. The other several girls also reluctantly lowered their heads. After the scene was subdued by Lu Li's big weapon, the several of them returned to the room and could finally have a normal conversation. After a brief greeting, the several of them got to the point. Senior brother Wang Lu, how did you come in? Lin Wan impatiently asked, isn't this group of immortal dreams limited to women? Is it because you have some special authority? Wang Lu sighed. I also want to know why. I myself am completely baffled. Then, he simply explained what had happened at the entrance, but after Tian Daolan and the others heard it, they just frowned, unable to figure out what had happened. After a while, Tian Daolan suddenly remembered something. By the way, do you remember that Chang Di? She can be considered to have entered this group of immortal dreams as a non-woman. Cherry and the others were enlightened. That's right, Chang Di too. Wang Lu was curious. Chang Di? Tian Daolan explained, she is also a disciple of my Yin and Yang school, just that she comes from a branch family. Although her heart is a woman, her body is that of a man. Didn't they say that a man with a woman's heart doesn't count? But Chang Di used to be a genuine woman. It was just that when she was cultivating yin-yang reversal, she accidentally went berserk, so she turned into a man's body. In the end, the group of immortal dreams still recognized her as a woman. Later, the elders analyzed that perhaps as long as you were once a woman, a 100% natural woman, even if you are no longer one, it can still count. So, senior brother Wang Lu, could it be that you are in a similar situation, but you don't remember it? Absolutely not. Wang Lu was resolute. What a joke, from the time he was born until now, he could remember everything, and it definitely didn't include the memory of his gender being reversed. From the time he was born, he was a genuine man, there was no mistake. From the time I was born? That's strange. Just when should I start counting my life? Theoretically, Ouyang Shang's time should also be a part of my life, right? Including the time when my soul drifted to the 3,000 worlds, it should also be counted as a part of my life. Could it be that there was something wrong with it? But Ouyang Shang was a genuine man, there was no mistake about this. Could it be that during the time when my soul crossed over, speaking of which, this was indeed an unsolved case, because Wang Lu didn't completely grasp his past memories. Regarding the time when he drifted through the 3,000 worlds, he only retained a lot of fragments, but it didn't include the part where he knew himself. In other words, Wang Lu couldn't judge what kind of person he existed as during that period of time. Therefore, the possibility that he was once a woman couldn't be ruled out. And when he thought of the time when he crossed over and became a woman, Wang Lu felt that there was nothing more f***ed up than this in the world. No, there's definitely something wrong with this deduction. There must be some other reason why I could enter this group of immortal dreams. Let's change the topic. Wang Lu let out a long sigh and then casually asked, is there any appraisal result on the heavenly silk headscarf? A few years ago, when he experienced the time travel scene in the immortal dreamland for the first time, that heavenly silk headscarf became the key evidence to prove whether time travel really existed. Unfortunately, after a few years, Yin and Yang school still couldn't come up with a reliable answer. Even today, whether time travel existed or not was still an unsolved mystery of the group of immortal tombs. However, many people had already forgotten about that heavenly silk headscarf. When it came to the heavenly silk headscarf, Tian Dao Lan looked embarrassed. In recent years, there have been some results from the divination, but there are many contradictions between them. The elders have spent a lot of effort to deal with them, but the result is still very vague. Wang Lu said, what if we exclude all the artificial subjective assumptions and only look at the result of the divination? Tian Daolan said, that heavenly silk headscarf is indeed one of the parts of the set of feather clothes. Wang Lu nodded his head. Go on. However, it doesn't seem to be the part that we lost, because the karma related to Yin and Yang school on this headscarf is too thin. It's like it has just been made and hasn't been used yet. But in theory, it should have been used for a long time before it was lost. Do you have any clear evidence to prove this? That heavenly silk headscarf was indeed used by Yin and Yang school before it was lost? This is very difficult. That part of history happened a long time ago, so the written records are already very vague. But, it should have been used. It's hard to make a set of magical equipment, but it didn't use it, it doesn't make sense. Wang Lu closed his eyes and thought for a while, and then opened them and said, do you think it's possible that when your feather clothes were just made, one of them had already been lost? It's just that, at that time, your ancestors made a counterfeit or similar method to cover it up. At the same time, the original one was received into the group of immortal tombs and then distributed to the later generations of Yin and Yang school in the form of a prize. Upon hearing this, Tian Dao Lan was startled. This, if we don't consider so many of your assumptions, it seems to make sense. After all, the historical records before the Age of Chaos are too vague, so you can say whatever you want. But, the question is, why did our sect's most valuable treasure fall into the group of immortal tombs? Yes, why? Wang Lu asked with a smile. In his heart, he already had a vague guess, but he no longer said it. How's your progress in this pass? Tian Daolan immediately complained, how could there be any progress? Aren't we just doing odd jobs for other people? It's just some trivial tasks. The reward is not much, but the effort spent is actually not little. Wang Lu asked, then why did you guys buy a house here? Do you plan to stay in Gorgeous Town for a long time and do odd jobs for Li Yan every day? Tian Daolan said, we have no other choice. In this heavenly earth, we are unregistered residents. According to the rules here, unless it's Daoist Master King Pill, otherwise, being an unregistered resident would be very inconvenient. That Li Yan is actually very easy to talk to. She wants us to do some odd jobs for her here, and in return, she will help us with our identity. Alas, senior brother Wang Lu, if you are also doing a task in Gorgeous Town, you must help us. Wang Lu apologetically smiled. I'm sorry, I'm going to leave Gorgeous Town soon. A King Pill level city is a bit inefficient for me. But before I leave, I can help you talk to Li Yan and see if she can solve your household registration problem as soon as possible. Senior brother Wang Lu, you're really the best. Lin Wan was pleasantly surprised and threw herself at him. It's just that in the blink of an eye, a few pieces of her clothes were gone, revealing a large area of her snow-white skin. Wang Lu took a step back and calmly dodged. Tian Daolan softly said, after this farewell, we don't know when we can meet again. Don't you want to leave some memories? It's not good to have sex with each other after we part. But, we'll miss you. Li Qingxi softly said. Yeah, you too, Sister Wu too. After we part, we won't be able to see each other again. Even our letters are getting fewer and fewer. We are actually very sad. Seeing that these girls were actually on the verge of crying while talking, Wang Lu was too lazy to care whether they were acting or serious. He hurriedly took out another big killer weapon. Since you just want to leave some memories to relieve your loneliness, then use this. He reached into his mustard seed bag and took out a thick stack of video crystal stones. Among them, the images of his master Wang Wu's naked body could be found everywhere. These are for you. I wish you a happy practice of telepathic finger. After bidding farewell to the several junior sisters of Yin and Yang school, Wang Lu went to the Temple of Heaven again. Li Yan was really easy to talk to and soon agreed to solve the identity problem for Tian Daolan and the others. Then Wang Lu directly left Chongqing City and rode his sword toward the Palace of Heaven. The Palace of Heaven was the largest city within thousands of miles and was also one of the important strongholds of the Temple of Heaven for many years. The one who controlled the Temple of Heaven was Moonless Harmonious Sky, who was ranked 7th among the 9 heavens of the Temple of Heaven. He had entered the high-level sequence and was an out-and-out overlord. According to the information obtained from the conversation with Li Yan at the table, Moonless Harmonious Sky was likely to be a deity stage expert. For someone who had just stabilized his cultivation in the middle grade of King Pill, his level was a bit too high. But wasn't it interesting if his level was particularly high? Chapter 552. This is the Palace of Heaven. Worthy of being harmonious heaven city, it already has the imposing manner of a demon king's fortress. Standing outside the Palace of Heaven, Wang Lu sincerely sighed with emotion at the Palace of Heaven, which was one of the top 10 cities on heavenly earth. The Palace of Heaven was extremely large. From the periphery of the city to the center of the city, the radiation radius was at least more than 100 miles, and the population was in the tens of millions. It was one of the largest cities in the vicinity. However, the core of the Palace of Heaven was a floating castle with a radius of no more than 3 miles. The castle was built in the sky above the center of the city, and it was called Moon Capital. Every time night fell, Moon Capital would gather the moonlight in the entire Palace of Heaven, so that the city could no longer see the slightest bit of moonlight, and this was because of the personal preference of the master of the Temple of Heaven, Moonless Harmonious Heaven. Her name was Moonless, so she did not want her subordinates to see the moon at night. Her logic was crude and simple, and it also made Wang Lu have a pessimistic expectation for this meeting before the meeting. After staying in the heavenly earth for a period of time, he had a more detailed understanding of this place. In his view, this Temple of Heaven was undoubtedly the unquestionable overlord of this place, but due to various considerations, it did not make this overlord status obvious. For example, every city in the heavenly earth had a corresponding city lord as the person in charge, and the person in charge was usually not the same as the master of the local temple. For example, the palace lord of the Palace of Heaven was not moonless. However, here came the problem. A city had both a city lord and a Temple of Heaven, so who had the final say in the end? The answer was the Temple of Heaven. Although the nominal ruler of the city was the city lord, the Temple of Heaven had the right to control the city lord, and when necessary, it could participate in the major matters of the city management. And what supported this strange ruling structure was the absolute force of the Temple of Heaven. The Palace Lord of the Palace of Heaven was a Yuanying stage master, but Moonless Harmonious Heaven was a Taoist master of deity stage. How could it be easy to make the Palace Lord speak louder than Moonless? Of course, the heavenly earth was vast and had a large population. There were always special cases. For example, Li Yan of Gorgeous Town did not like to participate in the mundane affairs. The management of the city was completely thrown to the city lord. She was alone in the Temple of Heaven. In fact, this should be the original intention of the Temple of Heaven. The clergy only needed to serve the heaven and manage their own cultivation. But this truth obviously did not work in the Palace of Heaven. The moon capital that blotted out the sky had fully reflected the absolute strength of the Temple of Heaven here. It must be known that just below moon capital was the residence of the palace master of the Palace of Heaven. Not to mention that the moonlight could not be seen at night, even the sunlight during the day was blocked. It was the same as being trampled underfoot. Moonless style of doing things was also evident. Dealing with such a person was indeed an art, so Wang Lu had done his homework in advance. Not only did he take a detour to Tsangtian City, he also prepared a few gifts. Hopefully, these preparations would allow him to get what he wanted. This Moonless Harmonious Heaven was once a fierce general who fought in the front line of the invasion of the lower realm. She had personally beheaded no less than hundreds of chaotic world generals. In a time of crisis, she did not hesitate to risk her life and sacrificed half of her body to permanently smash a passage to the lower realm. Thus, she was promoted by the Temple of Heaven as an exception and became the real master of the Palace of Heaven. Moreover, she lived here for a long time, like a vassal king. No matter how overbearing such a person was in other aspects, at least when it came to the chaotic world and the topic of war, she was undoubtedly an expert. And Wang Lu happened to have a lot of questions about the chaotic world that he wanted to ask. Last time at Li Yan's banquet, Wang Lu had too many thoughts and doubts. After entering the city, with Li Yan's letter of introduction, Wang Lu and Lu Li were quickly led into Moon Capital by the guards, but Moonless did not immediately meet them. The guards led them into a lounge, where there were already no less than 100 people waiting. The spacious lounge seemed to be crowded. Wang Lu and Lu Li couldn't even find a place to sit. Moon Capital is indeed worthy. Wang Lu softly sighed with emotion. The people waiting here were all guests who came to visit Moonless, either for official or private affairs. Most of these people's cultivation base was not low. There were more than 20 people who were at King Pill level, and even 2 of them were at Yuanying stage. Although they were just rookie Yuanying stage cultivators who had just crossed the threshold, they were still Yuanying stage cultivators. Right now, they were still arranged to be crowded in this narrow lounge, which showed how busy Moon Capital was. Before entering Moon Capital, Wang Lu had sensed with his primordial spirit that the main residence of the Palace of Heaven below Moon Capital was sparsely populated. Are you also here to visit Lady Moonless? As soon as Wang Lu and Lu Li stood still, they heard someone talking next to them. Aha! Wang Lu nodded his head. Where are you from? I am Hua Qingshan, a wandering nun from the temple of God of Xiuyun Mountain. Wang Lu turned his head and saw a girl with a bright smile but even more brightly dressed. She was wearing a coarse short shirt and a pair of fluffy trousers. There were several patches on her clothes, densely packed together like mosaics. She was dressed like a commoner who couldn't be more impoverished, but every patch on her body was shining brightly. They were all expensive fabrics woven from the 5-star spirit threads. This kind of gorgeous patched dress was really rare. Even in the fashion capital of 9 regions, such a design was rare. Wang Lu was curious and could not help but be lost in thought. Hua Qingshan giggled and said, "Does it look good? I designed it. This time, I came to visit Lady Moonless in the hope that she would approve me to promote this set of clothes in the vicinity." Wang Lu could not help but ask, "Why do you want to promote this?" "Because the original design is not attractive." Hua Qingshan sighed helplessly and took out another set of clothes. It was also a coarse blouse, full of patches, which looked very shabby. According to the original regulations of the Temple of Heaven, we wandering monks are responsible for walking in the secular world, soliciting alms and preaching. During this period, our standard uniform is like this. The original intention is to let the wandering monks reflect the noble character and unquestionable integrity of the Temple of Heaven in the process of wandering, so that more people have confidence in us. But now, when people see you in such a shabby dress, they avoid you like the plague. In some places, the wandering monks are even more excessive. They don't even pay attention to personal hygiene. The reputation of the Temple of Heaven is ruined. Wang Lu inwardly thought, you wandering monks, who are supposed to be poor, actually have a bad reputation by wearing gold and silver. However, when he thought of this moon capital that blotted out the sky, what could a mere gold patch do to you? In fact, the people below have reported to the higher-ups many times, hoping to change the past rules, but the higher-ups have always refused, saying that this violates the fundamental purpose of the Temple of Heaven. Alas, so we have to find ways to reform and innovate by ourselves. Here, this is the result of my innovation. Hua Qingshan proudly stuck out her chest. Although it is different from the standard illustration, it does not violate the written regulations at all. Anyway, the Book of Rites of the Heaven only stipulates the material of the clothes, but it does not specify in detail what kind of material to use for the patches. I believe that if it can be tested in the Palace of Heaven, it will be very popular. Good luck. Hee hee. Hua Qingshan smiled. Speaking of which, I still have a few sets here to test. Do you need them? I can see that your cultivation base and temperament are not bad, so you should also be the person in charge of a temple, right? With that, Hua Qingshan simply began to promote her own products. Wang Lu politely declined. However, after this dialogue, Wang Lu increasingly felt that this Temple of Heaven seemed to be very similar to some organization in his impression. Of course, this was not a problem. Anyway, he was not a local resident, so it was not worthwhile to care about other people's political structure. The problem was that he came here to seek knowledge, but at present, among the people who visited Moonless, there were only a few people who sought knowledge, and most of them were for policy. It was not a good thing for him to mix with this group of people. Moreover, as a highly politicized master of the Temple of Heaven, he was afraid that he had long lost interest in seeking knowledge and so on. Li Yan didn't know how many years ago she became friends with Moonless. She thought that Moonless was a cultivator who yearned for the immortal path in the past, but she didn't expect the world to change. Thinking of this, Wang Lu even considered giving up this route. Anyway, this world was very big, and there might not be only Li Yan, Moonless. However, at this moment, the door of the lounge was suddenly opened. A girl in a luxurious white dress with an indifferent face pushed the door and looked at Wang Lu. Lady Moonless has summoned you. Us? Wang Lu was quite surprised. The others were equally shocked. This girl actually jumped the queue. Moreover, she was personally appointed by Lady Moonless to jump the queue. What was the relationship between them and Lady Moonless? It must be known that there were 2 Taoist masters of Yuanying stage who were still waiting patiently. In theory, it would be their turn after 3 days, but the latest waiting time was at least a week. Why did she do that? Unfortunately, the maid in white had already frowned impatiently. Hurry up, Lady Moonless, time is very precious. Under the guidance of the waiter, Wang Lu left the lounge and went deep into the core of Moon Capital. However, not long after following the maid, Wang Lu felt that something was wrong, because they had already passed the reception room, but the maid continued to move forward. Hey, aren't we supposed to meet in the reception room? The maid in white turned around and glared at Wang Lu. Shut up and follow me obediently. Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh. What a fierce domestic dog. You. The blue veins on the forehead of the maid in white were bulging, and her murderous aura was slightly exposed. Wang Lu was not polite and looked down at her condescendingly. Tisk, tsk, 1 black, 2 yellow, 3 flowers, and 4 white. It's understandable that the lowest class of things doesn't know etiquette. The maid in white glared at Wang Lu for a long time, but finally swallowed hard and forcibly suppressed her anger. Be careful with your words and actions. This is the residence of Lady Harmonious Heaven. No one is allowed to speak at will without permission. Then, she walked forward quickly and led the way in front. After a while, they had entered the range of Moonless residence in Moon Capital, so Wang Lu realized that the place chosen by Moonless to meet the guest was her bedroom. It seemed that Li Yan and she really had a deep friendship. With just a letter of introduction, she could let Moonless have a private meeting with someone. Not long after, the maid in white brought Wang Lu to the door of the bedroom. At the door, 2 maids in black opened the door, so Wang Lu finally saw the long-known Lady Moonless Harmonious Heaven. A living dead with half of her body turned into bones. Chapter 553. In the bedroom, a woman with half a human face and half a skeleton was sitting cross-legged on the couch. Moonless Harmonious Sky, ranked 7th in the 9 heaven ranks set by the Temple of Heaven. She was a powerhouse with great prestige in the entire heavenly earth, and the actual ruler of tens of millions of people in the Palace of Heaven. In Wang Lu's expectation, she should be a heroic overlord. However, what he saw in front of him formed a very sharp contrast with his expectation. The legends about Moonless mentioned that she suffered injuries in the war with the chaotic world and never healed them in her life. He thought that they were just some eye-catching scars, which could be used as a medal to show off her martial arts, but unexpectedly, this Moonless was really thorough in doing things. The so-called sacrifice of half of her body was actually literal. The right half of Moonless' body was intact, but the left half was a skeleton. Part of her body was covered by her dress, but her head was exposed. Moonless' intact right eye was tightly closed, but the left eye socket of the skull was shining with a red light. The situation was extremely frightening. This honor alone was completely unexpected. For Wang Lu, all unexpected situations were bad news. The other party was a battle-hardened Taoist master of deity stage. In theory, his illusion technique could be seen at a glance. Even if she was essentially just a creation of the immortal dreamland and was not as good as a genuine deity stage master, she was still a deity stage master. Before he came here, he had combined some rare materials left in his mustard seed bag, plus the props that he bought at a high price in Sky City to greatly strengthen his illusion technique. However, it was still unknown whether he could hide it from the eyes of a Taoist master of deity stage. Without Li Yan's letter, Wang Lu would not have rashly come here. However, everything was basically based on a precise plan. If there was an unexpected situation, it would test his ability to adapt to the situation. Of course, this ability was also available to Wang Lu, so he calmly entered the room and greeted them with a smile. And what greeted him was the hearty laughter of Moonless. You are the 2 little guys that Li Yan introduced? Huh, come and sit down. Such a kind gesture was even more unexpected. Wang Lu even wondered if there was a publicity commissioner of her Temple of Heaven in this bedroom. As long as they recorded the conversation in the bedroom, they could publish a report tomorrow with the title, Lord Harmonious Heaven meets the grassroots people. This would show how approachable Lord Harmonious Heaven is. However, it was clear that no one else was waiting in Moonless' bedroom. Even the black-clothed maid, who had the highest position in the black and yellow sequence, could only wait outside the door. It was clear that this was a very private meeting. Don't stand on ceremony. After Wang Lu and Lu Li sat down on the praying mat, Moonless said, Li Yan and I have been through life and death together. Although I haven't seen her for decades, I always remember her kindness. She said in the letter that the two of you are her new friends. Li Yan does not make friends easily. Since you can get her approval, it is equivalent to getting my approval. I treat you guys as friends, so you don't have to be so reserved. Please keep the gifts, I don't need them. After saying that, Moonless slightly restrained his smile. Li Yan said in the letter that you two have questions about cultivation that you want to ask me? Yes, in recent years, there are fewer and fewer people who have the heart and sincerity to cultivate immortality, and more people are obsessed with fame and fortune. Hearing this, Wang Lu just wanted to laugh, thinking, you, a standard bureaucrat politician, have the nerve to criticize others? Moonless seemed to have seen through Wang Lu's thoughts and slowly replied, to deal with worldly affairs, I only use the left side of the dead body. Wang Lu froze for a moment, and then said with a smile, very well, then I won't be polite. First of all, I want to ask. Do you want to comprehend the immortal path through the convergence of life and death? Upon hearing this, Moonless opened his right eye. No wonder Li Yan spoke so highly of you in the letter. Those mediocre people only think that I'm showing off my scars, but they never thought that with my current status, who else do I need to show off? You're right, I do use life and death to approach the immortal path. With that, Moonless suddenly laughed. Apart from that, what else can you see? Life and death, yin and yang, black and white. All the contradictory and unified concepts should be reflected in you. Your left and right halves are entrusted with quite a lot of things. It should be said that you're trying to use this method to make up for your congenital defects. Hearing this, Moonless burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, well said. No wonder a talent like you would wander outside the Temple of Heaven's system. That old-fashioned theology can't satisfy you. Wang Lu said, no wonder you and Li Yan, who are friends of life and death, haven't seen each other for decades. Compared to that lazy but devout Li Yan, you should be tied to the stake. But from another point of view, if not, you would not be qualified to control the Palace of Heaven, a big city. For an organization in charge of the regime, idealists are not qualified to rise to a high position. After receiving Moonless' encouragement, Wang Lu simply bluntly said, we are not perfect creatures. I think all things in this world are divided into yin and yang, only we have no gender. When I asked Li Yan, she only said that it was the will of the heaven, but I don't think so. So, I want to ask Master Moonless, what is your opinion? The will of the heaven? Unexpectedly, after not seeing her for decades, Li Yan has learned to deceive herself. Moonless suddenly sneered, how does a human middle immortal come to be? Other people don't know, but how could she not know? She just doesn't want to admit it. With that, Moonless closed his right eye and said in a deep voice, you guessed it right, human beings do have a gender distinction, and we are the yin side. In theory, there should be a yin side corresponding to us. Wang Lu nodded and said, sure enough. But, why does the Temple of Heaven deliberately conceal this news? This is not good for the development of heavenly earth, right? Obviously imperfect, but they think they are perfect. Obviously, they have a natural yin physique, but they think they have both yin and yang. This cognitive deviation is a great obstacle to cultivation. You want to know? Moonless asked with interest, are you sure you want to know the answer? For you, since you have guessed the yin and yang division, you will no longer be affected by the cognitive barrier, so why bother to explore the secret behind it? Curiosity is the driving force of progress. Well said. That being the case, I will let you have a look. With that, Moonless stood up and clapped his hands. Wang Lu only saw a slender and soft palm touch a pale bone claw twice, and then the bedroom door was pushed open by the maid in black. I want to take the guests to see my collection. You lead the way. Moonless collection was built in the underground part of Moon Capital. The group of people, led by the maid in black, walked slowly in the deep corridor. Along the way, there were countless kinds of traps. The maid in black who led the way used more than 30 kinds of props as keys to avoid them one by one, and finally led the 3 people to the entrance of the collection. Normally, no matter how precious the treasure was, it would not be so heavily guarded. Moreover, the really important things were generally carried by the cultivators. Therefore, seeing the lineup at the entrance, Wang Lu faintly felt that what he would see next would not be anything good. Sure enough, after opening the door of the collection, the maid who led the way hurriedly retreated, as if she had a deep fear of the things in the collection. Moonless stepped in generously. Behind the door was a spacious and deep hall. As Moonless entered, it suddenly became brightly lit, so that people could see the collection in the collection. The moment his vision became clear, Wang Lu could not help but close his eyes. This was truly an unexpected sight. How do you feel? Moonless' voice came from the front. These are the trophies I collected in the war 45 years ago. Any one of them is an outstanding master in the chaotic world. This is the real military merit worth showing off. The scars on my body are only a shame. What's there to show off? Wang Lu nodded silently. With the light around the collection, he could clearly see dozens of crystal troughs in the hall, and the corpses of chaotic creatures lying quietly in them. Each of those chaotic creatures looked ferocious and had their own characteristics. Some had fangs turned outward, some had an eye in the middle of their forehead. But the basic outline was very clear. They were humanoid, and they were full of muscles and broad bones. They were very standard, male. I guess this is the answer you want. Why does the Temple of Heaven want to hide the division between yin and yang? Because we can't tell the world that your other half is a chaotic creature. So that's how it is. This is indeed a secret that can't be made public. While carefully observing the corpses in the collection, Wang Lu asked, generally speaking, creatures need to mate with yin and yang to reproduce. We have the heaven to give us new life, but what about the chaotic world? They are only males, how do they reproduce? I see that the corpses of these chaotic creatures, in addition to the basic outline, often have the characteristics of other animals, such as ox horns, sheep hooves, horse tails, and so on. Could it be? Moonless coldly snorted and said, when the need to reproduce overwhelms everything, they will naturally look for all possible mothers. Humph, dirty lower realm scum. Wang Lu looked for a while and then asked, strange, these chaotic creatures are only male? Can't they give birth to females? I don't know. For thousands of years, we have never really set foot on the land of the lower realm. Every time we come, we kill all the invaders. The filthy land of the lower realm is fatal to us. Wang Lu nodded his head to show that he understood. At the same time, he realized that this immortal dreamland might also be hiding an extremely huge and difficult subplot, to help the chaotic creatures of the lower realm overthrow the heavenly earth and bring the yin and yang back to normal. However, this idea was not convenient to say. He could only think about it in his heart. Just as he was thinking about it, he suddenly heard Moonless said. Li Yan's evaluation of you in the letter is very high, and seeing you today, you really did not let me down. Wang Lu cupped his hands and said, you flatter me. I like you too very much, so you can stay in Moon Capital. Ah. I haven't expanded the harem of Moon Capital for more than 10 years. Today, I will make an exception for you too. Wait a minute, you're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.